Hello. Let me make sure my audio is good real quick first before I begin. Yeah, we should be good. You are watching Blacklisted. This is my show. I'm Jackson Heab. It is currently February 1st of 2026 at 9:01 p.m. And I'm here to talk about, well, I guess the start of my new show. So my plan for this show is it'll be a two-part segment. So during the first segment, I'll talk about current events and my opinion on the current events, and then this will be followed up by a color segment. The show will be streamed live on twitch.tv and YouTube, and that's the current setup, maybe adding Rumble and Kick into the mix later on as I get a better setup for simulcasting. It is currently, as I said before, February 1st, and there's a lot going on in the world right now. There are massive protests against ICE in Minnesota, and ICE approval is following very readily after the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. ICE approval is reaching a very low margin, and this has in many parts caused both Tom Homan and Donald Trump to begin to reevaluate their process around how they seek to handle the increasing mass deportation efforts, especially happening in states like Minnesota where we're seeing massive pushback. While there's been sort of playing around with both retreating and then possibly invoking the Insurrection Act, it's left a lot of people uncertain as to how this will transpire in the future. I personally advocate for mass deportations and think that we have to have a strict, harsh on crime policy that also takes into account the rule of law and justice around death, of course. So in that way, I do believe in mass deportations, but I also do believe in some level of reining back the way in which ICE has rolled out with, I think, a little bit less preparation than they should have had. So, of course, in this way, we move into talking about the government shutdown. As of January 31st, the government has entered a partial shutdown. This is affecting the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, Department of Labor, and the Department of Education, and just to name a few, DOT also especially. This has been heavily spurred on by criticisms over lack of ICE reform in the aftermath of the Alex Preddy shooting and the Renee Good shooting. While oftentimes people on the right are currently calling for the Insurrection Act to be invoked, people on the left are generally calling for ICE to be reined back and to retreat out of Minnesota fully. This is leaving us in a very clear dynamic wherein people on the right are cheering on this sort of mass deportation effort, while people on the left are very disappointed in it, and it's leading a lot of people to call for reevaluations in how ICE is handled. I guess that's the general news of what's happening today. The plan for this show is it'll be a two-part segment. Part one is my opinion, and part two is a color segment wherein we will bring in a guest. Of course, in this specific area, my opinion is pretty clear. I believe that mass deportations do need to be occurring, and I believe that we do need some level of reining back, though, of course. I guess the monologue is shorter than I thought. I'll go ahead and bring in my guest. But yeah, I'll still iron out the kinks of the show, but that's my introduction of it. My guest is not here currently. Hold on. We're waiting for Corbin. I guess while we're waiting for Corbin, I can talk to the chat, see how everyone else is going. No hate to Corbin. The plan was for the monologue to be 10 minutes. Doing it actually, I realize that the news is not really that big, and unless I talk more and more about my opinion, which of course the purpose of the caller segment is to get my opinion out. So in that way, I guess the monologue is shorter than I thought it would have to be. Yeah, Corbin's having PC issues, so we'll give him a moment to join in. But in the meantime, let me see what else we can talk about in the news. I mean, I guess I can talk more about myself. I'm Jackson Heab. I am a political commentator. I'm from South Carolina. I originally started to make political content coming off of the death of Charlie Kirk, talking about political violence. I had a lot of on-campus activism that got me into a little bit of a media attention, and from there I decided to make political content and talk about my experience as a young political voice and a political activist. Now I'm moving much more into political commentary, making videos on Instagram Reels and making videos on YouTube as well, but I guess that's essentially me. I don't know. I'm waiting for Corbin still, so apologies for everyone in the stream waiting. I guess I can see here. Yeah, still waiting for Corbin. Whenever he can get in here, I'll drag him in. We can move into the caller segment. But in the meantime, I can just sit here and see if there's anything going on in the chat, I guess. Hold on. Okay. Sorry, everyone, for some technical difficulties. Okay, Corbin is here. I'll be dragging him in now. Hey, Corbin. Sorry the monologue was a lot shorter than expected. I will be moving into the car segment now, real quick.
Jesus, hold
Gotcha. Are you there?
stuff. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Let me make sure that you are audible to the listeners. I have to adjust my overlay here. It seems to change every time I do the stream.
Yep, love those. Uh,
Yeah, the intro monologue was a lot less long than I thought it would be. I guess it's kind of hard to talk into a camera about the news.
well, your audio is really fucky right now.
Oh, is it for you?
Hold up. Yeah, hold on.
Gotcha.
Hold up. I'm just adjusting my levels. Holy shit! Wait, I really had to curse on here?
Yeah, you can curse on here. Yeah, it's just YouTube and Twitch, so it's all
Okay.
good.
Okay. Well, I just wasn't sure if this was a family-friendly show or not.
No, no, this is a family
Who
unfriendly
knows?
show.
Oh, good. All right. Am I visible?
Yes, you are. Yeah, you're clear. So, we were talking about mass deportations, and I guess the prompt for this caller segment is we were wanting to talk about the possibility of Tom Homan and Donald Trump retreating forces back, or retreating ICE back from Minnesota, and in some ways halting mass deportations. My argument is that they should possibly pull back, but only if it's to have a better effort pushing back again in the near future. And Corbin, what is your argument towards the prompt?
Well, first and foremost, I see you gave me the tuck square on
Oh,
screen, which is very small compared to you. There. All
I
right. Yeah.
know.
So just automatically making me look small in the eyes of the audience. Okay, I see. I see your game. All right. Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was figuring some technical stuff out.
So the prompt is: how should ICE respond to the recent criticism and the issues they've been experiencing in Minnesota? Should they retreat back from Minnesota, or should they, I guess, continue to press on? My argument is that they should possibly retreat, but only if it is in a temporary effort to come back in a more organized and, I guess, better constructed fashion.
Yeah, I guess the short and sweet of it is I am pretty much in favor of abolishing ICE at this point. I think that it's a wholly corrosive, just beyond like the abuses of power that have happened with this administration, specifically through ICE, just as a brand, as like a political, as a political aesthetic. I think it's lost too much like electoral support that it should just be completely uprooted, and like whatever prior functions it had before this administration should just be like completely given new directive under a different agency, under a different administration. Yeah, just complete and utter upheaval of the current system that be.
So I guess just to narrow down more, when you talk about like abolishing ICE, do you mean abolishing the function of mass deportations or reallocating them to a different agency?
It would be ideally reallocating them, because I think that deportations, of course, is an important function in society. Like, we don't want illegal immigrants here, um, especially not like criminal ones or people who come here and then commit additional crimes after having already illegally crossed the border. But the problem is that just systematically, as it is, as an institution, ICE is completely corrosive from the highest positions to the deepest, most intimate, most powerful parts of this agency are just are corrupt and and thoroughly brutal in every sense of the word. It needs to be like destroyed.
Well,
I don't know how else to put it.
I guess so. For me, my position on ICE is that we need a lot of reform, definitely. So I can agree with a lot of the issues with the present, I guess, arrangement under which ICE is operating. But what for you makes it leap to the level of just fully abolish it, fully get rid of it, and relegate its tasks to a different administration or different administrative body?
Well, again, it's going to be like, I think it's just lost a lot of popular support in the public eye. I don't think it's politically viable at all. I'm trying to think about like the amount of unpopularity that it's gained in just the last month. I think it's risen like like 17 points, I think the majority of Americans now technically aren't in support of ICE just because everything that's happening on the ground at the moment, like the videos of ICE officers pepper spraying a child, or like obviously murdering two people out in the street. Like these are just things that have a lot of reach. They're it's kind of an idea or a message a lot of people can get behind, the idea of, sort of like brutal law enforcement or police brutality, for lack of a better term. It's just it's completely and utterly lost any sort of, again, just political viability.
So you see it as, because of the brutality, it's sort of irredeemable in like terms of political perception. So for me, my big issue is
Yeah,
we
political perception, and then
yeah.
also, well, sorry, with the political perception, and then the actual corrosive institution itself.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I do agree with many changes in the institution. Specifically for me, my main changes that I want to see is changes in the approach of mass deportations, and changes in the training
Oh, sorry,
requirements.
your audio cut out there for me on my end. Could you
Sorry,
say that
okay.
again?
The main changes that I want to
No,
see
you're
is changes in, of course, training requirements, changes in deportation strategy. I have some proposed solutions. And then, in addition, I think body cams would be heavily advantageous. But I guess, so you see it that it needs to be abolished because of the brutality. Like, well, my main question is
Mhm.
effectively, what would an abolition achieve that reform couldn't? Do you think it's just political
What
viability
would an
just because of.
abolition? Well, so if it was political, yeah, if it was politically viable, I would say that you probably could go for reform. Um, but just because of the political lack of political viability, I would say that it just needs to be like crushed symbolically in the eyes of people, so that we can get people on board with the idea of deportations being something that can be okay or neutral or even good in American society.
Gotcha. Okay, and I guess so. Whenever I talk about like reform, I do see it as if a new agency sprang up that was essentially just like ICE 2, but with more reform, that would be acceptable. But what would stop people from simply just
Mhm.
seeing a new agency arise and say this is just like ICE 2.0? You know, like what would be, in your mind, what would be the
Well, I
substantial differences?
mhm. Well, ideally, it wouldn't have the same name, and then second of all, it wouldn't have the same leadership. Like Kristi Noem needs to be impeached into prison for the rest of her life. So does Tom Homan. So does Greg Budvino. And then, ideally, if we could go all the way to the highest level of government, Donald Trump could be impeached as well. Here's hoping we win midterms. Um, but beyond the kind of obviously far off possibility of impeaching the president, at least changing leadership, and changing the rhetoric and the tactics that are utilized by ICE at the moment, I think are important as well.
So I guess from that angle, I do agree in the sense I don't agree with the impeachment of Trump specifically, but I think Kristi Noem, in terms of her leadership, has a lot of rightful questioning. I disagree with a lot of the actions she's taken. I think
Mhm,
stepping down would be a very reasonable move to take. But I think
mhm.
in terms of changes of leadership and changes of tactics, I do agree. But do you agree with the core fundamental ideology of having the mass deportations in general? Like, what would make this new agency function
Mass,
significantly different?
probably not mass deportations. It depends on what you mean by mass. Like when you say mass deportations, do you mean literally deporting every single illegal immigrant in the United States?
Yes.
Okay, so if we're using that definition of mass deportation, I would be against that, but I'm not necessarily against like massive amounts of deportation. It's just going to depend on the context in which it's happening. So, for instance, if maybe unemployment was really high and so was inflation, we wouldn't have a super strong need to import a lot of additional labor into the economy. So in that instance, I would be against like increasing immigration, or I would be more in favor of something like mass deportations. It would just depend.
Gotcha. So for you, it's more of a utilitarian thing.
Hmm.
So I would argue, and
Well,
this is kind
I
of.
mean, well, I mean, sorry.
So I guess I would argue
Mhm.
that mass deportations are always going to be more utilitarianly beneficial. And the main thing that I can go into of why I think mass deportations are more effective, and I can go through, I have a lot of points, I guess, because I'm making the positive claim here that mass deportations are good. I mean, there's multiple
Mhm.
different categories we can go into, but if it's easier, the first category I'd like to go into, hold on, I had them narrowed down. Here we go, is I believe that it is economically dangerous to not engage in mass deportations. And I qualify this for
Economically
multiple
dangerous.
reasons. So, the primary reason why I see it as economically dangerous is because it overturns the fundamental rule of law in America. I think whenever we start having selective enforcement based off of what is utilitarianistically beneficial in the moment, that sets a very dangerous precedent. I think that lack of rule of law is one of the most dangerous precedents you can set. If you look at countries which have very poor economic outlook, you can find no country that really has strong selective enforcement, but has a very clear, positive economic outlook. Property rights come into question, civil liberties come into question, and government institutions especially. So I find it hard to say, like, how can we draw the line when and where we enforce the laws that have already been pre-established?
Well, I guess what does it have to do with like economic output?
Oh, because long-term rule of law violations. If you're in a country with lower standards around rule of law and sort of selective adherence to rule of law, it has a suite of negative economic benefits or economic impacts. Sorry. So like as I was speaking,
Okay,
there's no successful
Yeah, so
countries
it's
with
more
poor
of
rule
a
of law. Yeah.
it's more of a correlative point than necessarily a causal one.
I would say
To a
it's
degree.
I would say it's causal. I would say that a lot of economists
You said
reflect
okay.
that negative rule of law very quickly because it derides trust in governmental institutions. It very quickly has a suite of unknown economic impacts. That's why I say economically dangerous.
Mhm.
It's hard to say
Yeah, I
the
can. Yeah, I
severity
can
of the
get behind.
impacts, but I see them as severe.
Hmm. Yeah, so I can get behind that, but it's probably going to depend on the type of a law, and it's going to depend on how we implement that. Because I assume you're bringing this up. I assume you're bringing this up in in uh in counter to people who would advocate for something like oh fuck why am I some why am I don't know why I'm blanking on the name, but some sort of path towards like citizenship or legal status, right, for illegals that are currently here.
Yes.
Okay, so if I can if I can steal me when I think you're saying, what
So,
you're trying to argue is that that legal status, granting some sort of legal status to illegal immigrants who are currently here, would be economically disadvantageous because um, increasing or like corroding rule of law is going to lead to some sort of bad economic
so
outcome.
I guess I can restate it for a little bit more clarity. I see it that rule of law
Mhm.
is integral for the stability of a nation's economy. It's one of the best looked at factors by historians and political scientists towards indicating the downfall of a nation. A suite of very roundabout consequences that almost always happen to follow negative rule of law impacts. As rule of law derides, generally economic derision follows. And I see it that while
Mhm.
pathways to citizenship
So,
are a possible roundabout to the negative of rule of law, you sort of have three options. You have the option of A, not deporting people and not making them citizens. This option I see is obviously violates rule of law and it sort of substitutes out. I see it as immoral for multiple reasons above the rule of law impacts, but it's economically dangerous at the most like fundamental level where we're going at now. But initially, I see it that pathways to citizenship, while they don't openly violate rule of laws, it sets a new legal precedent. I see these as unjust and immoral.
okay, so I guess I would ask, can you do both of those things at once? Are they mutually exclusive? Can you allow pathways to citizenship without corroding rule of law?
You can because adding pathways to citizenship, it's somewhat
Hmm.
corrosive. It's sort of like a really corrosive to rule of law would be not enforcing it at all. No deportations, no pathways to citizenship,
Hmm.
sort of leaving this kind of like slave class below us, you know? But then I see it as
Hmm.
while pathways to citizenship, it's sort of like a mass pardon, where it's not nearly as corrosive, but it's still semi-corrosive. So that's one negative. But to me, there could be cons that outweigh it.
Hmm.
But I see it that is then
Hmm.
unjust
So,
and immoral. And the reason why I would say that pathways
mhm.
to citizenship are unjust and immoral is because you have a class of illegal immigrants, some which have self.
let's stick with the
Yeah, we can stick with that.
sorry,
Yeah.
let's stick with
No, of course, if it helps to
yeah.
break it down. Yeah.
I was gonna say let's stick with the economic framing, because
Gotcha.
specifically you were putting it through an economic lens, as far as from a utilitarian point of view, it's going to have better economic benefits to the country because it's corroding rule of law less. So specifically, I think if we can theoretically establish strong borders while granting legal status to people who are already here, while also creating easier legal pathways for people who want to come to the country. Would you say that
Um,
solves your would you say that solves your problem?
Well, I'd say that's unrelated to the problem of illegal immigrants. Whenever I talk about mass deportations, like, I see it that
Hmm.
the immigration system is like such a separate topic of debate. So I see it as, we have the problem now of 20 million people illegally here. I don't see,
Hmm.
increased legal immigration as necessarily a solution. I feel like that problem has to be solved through
Hmm.
either pathways of
Well,
citizenship.
so the reason that I bring up increasing pathways for it, increasing easier avenues for legal pathways to citizenship for immigrants is because it solves that problem of people needing to come here illegally, right? So a lot of the reason that we have as many illegal immigrants as we do, or at least one of the contributing factors, is that like pathways to citizenship generally take a pretty long time. Like they're generally fairly difficult. Not even just for like Latin American countries, but also like European countries. I think people who come here from like Ireland or Scotland have to wait 6 to 7 years before they get granted like full citizenship. It's just the legal avenues here are incredibly difficult, and that's why we have a lot of people who are coming illegally. Whereas if we opened legal pathways for people to come here, or we streamlined legal pathways for people to come here, I think that would solve a lot of those issues.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't see how it would solve the present issue of, we have a unknown number of illegal
Mhm.
immigrants, some 10, 20 million, depending on who you ask. How do
Mhm.
we solve this present issue? Because I agree that, increasing legal
That's why I said you
immigration.
could do both, right? Like, well, that's why I said you could do both. You could disincentivize illegal immigration by one, creating strong borders. That's important. Two, streamlining the legal immigration process, and then three, you can grant legal pathways for people who are already here illegally.
Yeah, but I see it that granting legal pathways to people who are already here has a lot of other issues. So it's like, I can understand that, like, in terms of stopping, there's sort of two problems here that are like getting intermixed, right? The problem of
Hmm.
illegals wanting to come here and the problem of illegals being here. I see it that, yes, I agree that
Hmm.
I have issues with the
Both of those
approach
have to do with
to.
the rule of law, though, right?
Well, rule of law would be about whether or not we enforce the prior law that people who are here illegally should be deported. So priorly, if you're here
Yeah,
legally,
but
you have a
but
legal violation.
right, but like so solving incentives for people to break laws is also important in rule of law, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, it can help reduce the problem in general, but incentives, the best disincentive for breaking a law is enforcement of the law, right? I mean, for murder, like, we don't really focus on raising kids to be more
Mhm.
socialized. We generally focus on, convictions, jail time, punishment. I see it that it's far more important for rule of law that justice is enforced than it is that crime is disincentivized. Because the ultimate disincentive is
Mhm.
justice.
Well, so I can agree that justice is, of course, important. When I say granting people legal status, I'm not necessarily saying that they should be given no sort of penalty or punishment for coming here illegally. They still broke our laws. It's important to still enforce that, but deportation isn't necessarily the only addendum or isn't the only remedy that you can give to someone who violates our immigration system.
I see it as though it's the only moral and just outcome. So the main reason I see this
Why
is a
would that be
couple
the
of
only moral
reasons.
or just outcome?
So I
Mhm.
guess I can break it down into two categories, which would be moral and just. So for me, the morals
Well,
has to do.
sorry, continue.
So for me, the main issue with it is you have obviously, however many illegals were here already, they had been told they would get deported, and 2 million people have already self-deported, right? So in this scenario, we're already seeing mass self-deportations. Firstly, if we switch back up and allow for pathways to citizenship with the people who are still staying here, it actually hurts the people who followed our rule of law and followed the morality that we outlaid, and benefits the people who snuck around our self-deportation offer and instead sought to, continue to violate our law. So it even further dilutes, I guess, the moral quality of codification because you have 2 million people who would have been, I guess, essentially unjustly deported, right? And then from there, initially, the question is, if we're codifying these people, what does that say to the people who have been in the legal immigration waiting list forever? Yes, we can help our system, but everyone can agree that the amount of influx that we could allow could nowhere be near the amount that would be infused from rapid codification, right? I mean, if you're codifying 11 million legals, we're not going to be adding in 11 million, or if you're codifying 11 million illegals, sorry, we're not going to be adding in 11 million legals that year. So the problem is that the people who hop the border get the positive benefit of becoming American citizens and having easier pathways to citizenship than people who are outside of the country, who may just be given a flat yes or no.
Okay, in this, I'm trying to figure out how this wraps back around to the economy.
Well, no, this is about justice now. I mean, the economic output. I'm talking about why
So
I believe the
I kind of wanted
pathways.
to well, I kind of wanted to stick on the economic one because that was kind of the first point we were hitting. Your specific claim, to go back to the original point, was that corrosion in rule of law leads to generally bad economic output for a country. And I'm trying to figure out how this wraps back into that.
Yes, and so my argument was that corrosion of rule of law would be the negative impacts of not effectively deporting people. So that's the rebuttal to the argument of it's kind of too hard, it's too difficult, so our solution is going to have to be effectively ignoring mass deportations, but not pushing towards codification. Kind of like the willing ignorance that you see many countries have, sort of like the UK presently. So that's a rebuttal to that claim. And then the claim is that while, yes, pathways to citizenship have far less derision against rule of law, they are unethical because it allows for what I said prior. So it's unjust. So you either have one option, one that is economically dangerous and unjust, or one that is simply immoral and unjust, which I see as being pathways to citizenship.
So when you when you say that that economically this is bad, is it just because of the perception of a corrosion of rule of law, or is it because of an actual corrosion of rule of law?
I almost feel like the distinction is, I guess, unnecessary because it's hard to say what causes the great derision, but effectively it would, derive rule of law.
I would assume perception of rule of law.
Perception, I would say, is significantly more impactful, yeah. But also actual derision will be
yeah, because
lesser.
I would agree with that. I guess to go back to the economic part, which this plays very loosely into the economy, but we'll stick with it. So if someone is granted a legal pathway who's already here illegally, but they still face a penalty, can't you kill two birds with one stone? One, you get to keep the economic advantages that comes with generally a lot of immigrations into your country, and two, you still get to keep the perception of rule of law.
So yeah, in that way, codification with some punishment does help with rule of law. But in that way, I see that it has a problem with morality and justice. If you were a person in another country who's in this legal immigration,
sorry, can we just stick? Well, sorry, just to take things one at a time. Can we just stick with the economy?
Well,
So
yeah, but
economically,
my argument is codification doesn't have very much negative economic impact. From there, it's a morality and a justice thing. The derision of rule of law is very minimal for codification with a punishment. I agree. But it's still a derision, but it's probably not enough to cause a significant economic damage, right?
Okay. Okay, but so I guess we can solve the economic negative that you brought up without deportation, right? Is the conclusion of that position.
Yeah, but only with codification, which I think also carries the weight of being immoral, unjust, and you can get the same economic benefits.
When you say codification, what do you mean?
Codification, like pathways to citizenship, like codifying someone who's illegal, bringing them into the system.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So for me, I would say that
yeah,
in that way it does help the economy significantly.
Okay.
I think there still can be I guess my main issue is, of course, there are economic incentives to pathways to citizenship.
But I guess so. Just from an economic point of view, without necessarily have to getting into the justice or the morality or ethics of it, that would kind of be my position. That the one that we just concluded, that you can like keep perceptions of rule of law without necessarily resorting to deportations. That is possible.
Yeah, you definitely can. Yeah, totally. I mean, because it's not that the only outcome for the punishment is deportations, but I see it that even though you can, doesn't mean you should. So yeah, we have the descriptive, but like
okay. I just wanted to kind of hammer that home because it was important, because it sort of I guess goes against your initial claim a little bit in supporting mass deportations, which is that it's economically advantageous.
No, mass deportation. So I'm arguing, I guess, apologies if I poorly framed it. I'm arguing that there are three sort of, outcomes, right? Deport, codify, or leave them here with ignorance. I'm arguing that leaving them here with ignorance is economically dangerous. I'm arguing that codifying them is economically neutral, But as I'll get into later, you can get the exact same benefits from legal immigration. So in reality, it doesn't really have any economic incentive directly. And then I'm arguing that deportation has both problems solved, being that you deport people who are here illegally, and you can still get back the same economic benefits just through legal immigration. So the main point of the it's not necessarily that the rule of law point speaks against people being codified. It's meant to speak against people who are being, I guess, the willing ignorance point, which is very common in many foreign countries because I see it that codification is immoral. So it's sort of like a Venn diagram kind of. That covers this point, and then the
Okay,
moral
so they
justice arguments cover the
they
other.
play into each other.
Yeah, that covers the grounds of
Okay.
ignorance. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well then, I guess we can move on to justice or
Yes.
morality or ethics at that point if you want. So
Yes.
deportation are more ethical in your position.
Yeah, I think not deporting legal or illegal immigrants who are here currently is unjust and immoral.
Do you think that goes the same for any illegal immigrant?
I think it's different depending on who it is, but I believe that all illegals is more
Mhm.
ethical for them to be deported, except for one specific instance, which is whenever someone who is born over our borders and has both of its parents, like doesn't have a livable outcome in another country. So if you have no living family members in another country and you have no like place to go, I think in that case you more than qualify
Mhm.
for refugee status and should be allowed to stay under that guise.
Okay, so I guess I don't know necessarily what I can say against this being ethical or not. Um, so because like we're probably just at if we're probably just gonna like agree to disagree that like it's the most ethical penalty for deportation or for illegal immigration is deportation. Like I just don't necessarily agree with that. I don't even think the American system agrees with that because a lot of illegal immigration is considered civil violations, not even necessarily criminal ones. So like it's not like literally just crossing our border or overstaying a visa to work here to raise a family to join a community. That's I guess you could definitely say that there's like something unethical about breaking the law, but I guess I don't know if I would say codification as you're defining it is the most is unethical as a form of penalization.
Well, I guess to me, I see it as it is in some ways an objective argument because, we all have a sense of like objective ethics. So for me, at least, justice is very important to my ethical principles. I think it's very important that people who, what you get positioned in the right place, I guess. So I see it that if you are someone who is waiting to get in legally and you're following our legal framework, I think it's clearly unethical that someone who skipped the line and broke in, yeah, sure, if it was for a better family, it's for a better family, but would you not argue that it's
Mhm,
unethical that someone who skipped that line and possibly would have been deemed
mhm.
unacceptable by the legal system, now that they're in illegally, they can just simply be codified by the fact that they skipped the line? To me, that seems unethical. That you get rewarded for breaking our country's laws, and then because you actually followed our country's laws, you get hurt by it in the crossfire. It seems like a blanket contradiction of our principles.
Okay, so do you think that it's more or less pragmatic to keep people in the United States who are here legally right now?
I
Like, do you
guess
think
is it more
it's
like
more economically
practical?
advantageous or disadvantageous? Practicality is one part of it, but whether or not it's more economically even advantageous, whether or not there are other considerations that are taken in, like the fact that a lot of illegal immigrants who are currently here are people that have lived here, that have been contributing members to society for a large portion of their lives, or the fact that we have, or the yeah, I guess pretty much just like those reasons. Like immigration is just almost always economically advantageous. Uh, our economy is incredibly robust. We can take in and incorporate and assimilate people into our system fairly quickly. It's actually pretty impressive how well the our amazing capitalist free market economy incorporates new labor into its system, and then the fact that we have a lot of people who are genuinely good contributing members of society who are moral ethical people like uh, a lot of Hispanics that come here illegally are like good Christian conservative people who are just trying to make a better life for themselves, and to take those people that are contributing so much to society to say, well, actually, despite you being here for such a long time, despite you having raised a family and built a community and yada yada yada, we're actually just going to kick you out of the country
Well, but
because
I guess
it's like slightly unethical. The other penalizations that we have for you aren't as ethical as the most maximal one as deportation.
well, that's the unfortunate reality for me about justice.
Hmm.
Sometimes, like for example, a drug dealer can have a family who he's provided for off the back of his, drug providing, and obviously that's a very hyperbolic example. But good things can come from bad actions. But regardless, justice, rule of law, and upholding a strict moral character as a nation is very important to me. And so the
Hmm.
way that I see it is, we talk about the economic benefits. It's not that I deny that
Hmm.
immigrants can have economic benefits. They definitely can. But the sort of thing with illegal immigration is that it can be split into two types of economic incentives. Type 1 is economic incentives that would already be sufficed by legal immigrants. As we both know, there is an endless supply, effectively, of legal immigrants that are probably going to be of higher qualification than the illegals. We can both agree. Because illegals are people who are willing to violate the law, not even attempt to get in legally. So it sort of implies that they probably are aware that it would be a lot harder for them to get in legally. So from that heuristic, you can say that probably the cast of legal immigrant applicants we have is going to be higher than the cast
Well,
of
actually,
illegal applicants.
well, I mean, to be clear, actually, the amount of illegal immigrants that come here commit less crime than legal immigrants do, as well as citizens of the United States. When I say that, I mean they come here illegally and then they don't commit any crimes after the fact. So crimes committed after having entered illegally.
Yeah, that's somewhat unrelated though, because obviously we don't have too many statistics on second
Hmm.
generation. That's where you see a lot of illegal immigrant crime in other countries. And then on top of that, also, as I was saying with the economic incentives, because that's the main focus right now, is initially, all the economic incentives you can get from illegals could also be fulfilled
Well,
equally by legals, if not greater. And then the
mhm.
other incentives that are
Well,
fulfilled better by illegals are incentives that essentially come from them functioning as a kind of slave class presently, not getting paid the minimum wage, paying into Social Security and not getting anything out. I see it as economically they're neutral, but we could get more benefit that's actually more ethical from the endless cast of legal immigrant applicants we have. So if we're taking the economic argument, protecting illegals is kind of ridiculous when we have such a supply of legals, correct?
mhm. Yeah. So I guess it goes back to a question of practicality, regardless of the ethics of whatever penalization we think that illegal immigrants should be subject to. Do you think that it's do you think that it's more or less practical to deport 10 million, 20 million people right now?
See, practicality is not my main concern whenever I see it as possible.
Hmm.
I think there are practical
Well,
methods to
so
do it.
so
But I see it that it's sort of like, yeah, it's more
mhm,
practical to not enforce murder, but we still enforce murder. I think if it violates our, protocols around morality and justice, and it's possible, which
mhm.
it is possible, and I have ways in which it is possible, I think it's necessary that we uphold this moral justice framework above anything else, because that's the foundation of our nation, right?
Mhm.
That's what our country's built on.
Well, so just specifically just fitting it like within policy. Do you think it's more or less practical?
To deport or not to
Like
deport.
if you were a policymaker, if you were a politician and you looked at the facts as they are, is it more or less practical? Like is it more in the interest of the economy and the just general average person to deport 20 million people?
I guess when you say practical, do you mean like in terms of
Mhm.
like easy or like
I mean,
positive?
is it
Because there's sort of multiple like kind of
mhm.
claims being wrapped
Is
up in
it
terms of like
is it
benefit and then ability.
mhm. Yeah, so it's more economically advantageous to grant legal status to illegal immigrants than it would be to deport them.
I mean you get the economic gain
So
from the
something like that.
immigrants,
Let's just
but it would be more effective to just get that
mhm.
gain from legal immigrants. Yeah, sure. There are many things that are
Well, if we
economically
well,
effective that are
sorry,
immoral and
sorry, one thing,
negative though.
sorry, one thing. So if we have legal immigrants that are already here, that have already been working for a long time, that have built communities, that have built lives here, that have friends and family, and they've been contributing members to society for so long. Why not just grant them that legal status already if we already have them here?
Because it's unjust and immoral. It's, how did you get here? The cause of how you got to your position
But
matters a
but
lot.
so the mhm. So whether or not it's unjust or immoral is going to outweigh whether or not it's practical for you.
Most definitely, yeah. I think if it sort of splits into
Okay.
two areas because it is like it's going to be easier always to basically do nothing. Like
Mhm.
we can agree on this for any level of crime enforcement, any level of policy. The
Again,
less input
sorry.
requiring option.
Sorry, I'm not advocating that we do nothing. I'm saying that we can still penalize them. It just doesn't necessarily have to be deportation because that maximal punishment is a lot more disadvantageous for the economy and for the average U.S. citizen than it would be to keep the immigration here or immigrant here.
I mean, there are incentives, yeah, economically, definitely. But to me, I see that those
Mhm.
incentives kind of get outweighed because you could as much easily get those incentives just from more legal immigration. So if we agree, and for the sake of argument, I'll say that we do need more legal
Mhm.
immigration. I personally stray a little bit in the opposite direction, but for the relevancy of the economic issue, if we're purely arguing about illegal immigrants, then obviously all of the
Mhm.
economic benefits that the general people get could just as easily be sufficed in a way that is moral. So it's like, yeah, sure, there are incentives
Mhm.
economically to doing this immoral action, but we can very easily get
Mhm.
those same incentives from the moral action, which is just deporting people who rightfully should be deported because they violated a law knowingly and didn't choose to self deport after they were granted the option. Or we could sort of codify them regardless and not enforce our moral and just legal policy.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, like we are enforcing the law to some degree, right? I'm not like you can fine them, you could give them even potentially jail time. I'm not advocating that they don't force any sort of penalization. I'm not necessarily completely pro. What's it called? Um, like I'm not for like complete legal abdication from any sort of potential punishment for any sort of like violations they've made to our law, but there's there's just like a huge amount of impracticality from a legal standpoint that I don't know why we would ever chase this based I don't know why we would ever chase a policy like this based on what's like the most maximal ethical standard that we can hold the immigrant to.
So you see it that because it is somewhat less. So I guess let's go into a few different avenues here. So we talked about punishment and then
Hmm.
legal practicality. I want to circle back to both of these.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, I see that
And,
punishment
and,
is
and
obviously not sufficient, right? Because like, what is your proposed punishment? Like, what's a example of a punishment that would be reasonable for an illegal immigrant to have to incur in the process of its pathways to citizenship?
yeah, like you can find them, you can give them just fully removing them from the United States of America is is just like almost I don't want to be rude, but like it's policy wise incredibly naive.
I strongly disagree. We've done it for many years and it's worked greatly for us. And I guess I see it
No,
that
hold on, sorry. Mass deportations. That's different. Mass deportations.
I mean,
I'm not against deportations in general, but mass deportations right now is incredibly naive. There's a reason that that there's a reason that inflation has increased under this administration. There's a reason that we're sending billions upon billions of dollars to ICE. There's a reason that we're seeing like all of these inflated numbers going up in the economy, and it's because we're spending so much money on this like weird agenda under this administration to deport as many people as possible. It's just it blows my mind that this is even like a policy goal that we have when there are so many clear economic there are so many like clear policy decisions that are just incredibly poor that are being done under this administration that aren't advantageous to anyone.
well, I can agree that a lot of the systems in which we are going through the mass deportations are negative. So I guess how about we try and split it up into sort of two categories? First like can we and then should we? So
Mhm.
in terms of like, is it possible to do mass deportations? I fundamentally think it is. I mean, I would say that Obama's 3 million over 8 year deportation is mass deportations. I think the numbers could be upscaled primarily because we have more people here now, but I'd say that does represent a mass deportation, right? That would be depending on your estimate, either 33% or 15% of our current illegal population, and it was not one of the primal like campaign goals. So it's reasonable to say that could be upscaled.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at like what I believe is the main problem with the current administration's process of deportations, is we're sort of taking a like a on the ground roaming perspective to it. You're seeing people going through cities and looking for illegals in a far less coordinated way, where it's, of course you're going to the homes of criminals, which I see as reasonable, but then on top of that, you're sort of seeking out illegals in cities. However, there's a very simple, very legally practical way to go about these mass deportations, which is that almost all of these illegal immigrants are working in specific industries. It's no secret, we know that be it through farming, accommodations, or many other industry subsets, which have even requested to not have deportations due to economic risks, many of these industries which are working to pay these people below the minimum wage, we actually know pretty much exactly where a lot of them are. So how would it be impractical if we could simply just pursue the businesses that we know are hiring illegals, go through during working hours, and obviously penalize the large corporate elites who are benefiting off of effectively slave labor of people bypassing our systems? It's a pretty fundamentally easy way to access almost all of these illegal immigrant populations.
I'm sorry, through like corporate penalization as
No,
opposed
through the
to.
locations in which we know they're being hired. So the reason why we're doing this
Mhm.
current strategy of sort of individual hunting down of illegals is because we refuse to go for the elite businesses that are hiring illegals. If you want to get them out, it's not like there's a bunch of industries that are evenly dispersing them out. There's actually a very small set of industries that are hiring the vast majority. Be it farming, hotel accommodations, these are havens for illegals. And simply going to these individual businesses during working hours and making arrests would be massively effective. I mean, it's such a concentration that it would allow for mass deportations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I agree. There are easier ways than what we're currently doing right now to go about mass deportation. But even just beyond the easiness or the like how you necessarily go about conducting deportations is different from like whether or not it's economically advantageous. Like you bring up, I think you brought up farmers for industry that relies a lot on illegal immigration. Like Donald Trump has already walked back a lot of has I think walked back some of the policies that he's had cracking down on agricultural or illegal immigrants that are in that are heavy in the agricultural industry because farmers are well one of his a large portion of his voter base, and two, um, they were basically like rallying behind they were I think they submitted a complaint to DHS over 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 labor shortages that was happening as a result of the deportations.
Well, I guess to me, that's an unbelievable indicator that we should be doing these mass deportations. If the farming industry, and here's a like
Mhm.
good thought to have, if the farming industry is becoming dependent on illegal immigrant labor, why is that?
Mhm.
Why are illegal immigrants so beneficial to farming? The answer is pretty simple because farming wages and farming margins have been cut down so far to the degree that you almost need a class of effectively slaves. Illegal immigrants are effectively becoming a
Mhm.
slave class in America. They're paid
Mhm.
below the minimum wage. They are, paying taxes and not receiving benefits. It's actually really unethical
Mhm.
to still have them here. So why are we actually
Right.
not
Well, so
deporting them within farming? It's not
mhm.
because of pathways to
Well, so
citizenship.
how do you solve that issue?
Deporting them.
You grant them legal status so that they can have worker protections, right? So they're not being paid under the table.
but that would be considered unjust and immoral because it, as I said, codification is unjust and immoral, as we have
Hmm.
previously semi-agreed, because it undercuts the experience of legal immigrants. It violates the prior precedent that many people willingly followed of self-deportation. And then, in
Hmm.
addition, it serves us no true benefit because we can get it all from legal immigrants, while serving us a
Hmm.
clear negative because it's an
Well,
unknown
just
population we're codifying.
hmm
So yeah, of course it would
well,
be,
just well. Mhm.
sorry, here you can carry on here.
Well, I was gonna say to like to be clear, the it's so much more advantageous to just give those people legal status. If like yeah, like I can be sympathetic towards an immigrant who sees an illegal that came here, or someone who maybe overstayed a visa, or someone who's just generally here illegally, uh, who who is um, who is basically getting some sort of legal status and is now ostensibly being kind of rewarded for being here illegally. But again, these people are like deeply rooted in some of these industries. Some of these yeah, like these people are just uh, these people are these people are working in these industries. They've been here for a long time. They've built communities. They've been like contributing economically for a long time, and to kind of just to kick them out it just like we already have the labor here. It's already accessible to us. I guess why would we sacrifice that in favor of like a slightly more just form of remedy for their illegal immigration status?
Because justice is, like the foundation of a good country, right? Having a moral
Hmm.
and just legal system. And we
Hmm.
talk about, like
Well,
now that we have,
mhm. well,
we have a
just to be
solution.
clear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, we have a solution to how we can deport them now. Of course, going to these businesses, we can
Mhm.
both agree that this would be an avid solution to being able to deport them. But I would argue over like, should we? Well, then we have, every benefit that can be prescribed to illegal immigrants can fully be fulfilled by legal immigrants. So knowing that we have a system wherein once all of those benefits apply to both legals and illegals, and we have a substantial cache of legals that could be swapped in place of the illegals, then it's clearly left up to only what is the ethical characteristic of deporting them or not deporting them. Because the economic benefits, if we're making the
Mhm.
positive claim that we should be keeping them, why should we? What do they offer that a legal immigrant doesn't? When, especially as we've
Mhm.
talked about before, there is a
Well, again, I'm
immorality
not.
and an
Sorry,
injustice to
sorry.
not deporting them.
Mhm. Sorry. Well, sorry. I'm not necessarily arguing that we should have illegal immigrants. Of course, yeah, we don't want illegal immigrants. By definition, it's bad for the country. It's illegal. But what we want is some sort of way towards legal status because it's just completely economically advantageous.
Well, I guess, but
Like you're
why?
asking, you're asking, what do these people offer that another legal immigrant wouldn't offer? Well, they've already been in these industries for a long time. They've been a part of these communities. They know the workers. They know the people. They know, like, they are already familiar with. They're already familiar, like, with the industry that they're in. Um, so, like, you get economic advantages just by virtue of the fact that they're already familiar with the labor that they're producing, and then you also get the fact that they're physically, literally here. So we wouldn't have to take time and money, like taxpayer money, to deport them, to send them back home, and then we wouldn't have to wait for a labor shortage, or we wouldn't have to have like even a short-term labor shortage to get more immigrants in there to start producing that labor again.
I mean, while I of course think that the morality and the justice supersedes the court of like a cold
Mm-hmm.
practicality, even if we do play with the idea of is it more advantageous to keep them here than to effectively replace them with legals, I would cast a lot of doubt on that. We talk about being economically familiar with industries. What industries are illegals currently familiar with? Industries that are only really surviving because of this slave class. So if you talk about like farming, for example, the jobs that are currently being filled by illegal immigrants would likely not be filled by them after codification, because a lot of these jobs we'd find are fundamentally unfundable. farmers in this country are going bankrupt even with this cache of effectively slave laborers. So the economic familiarity actually wouldn't be very beneficial. And this even goes far more out the window when you go to the idea of high skill immigrants. So, talking about, while of course, they are almost all illegals, what we call low skill immigrants, we have a very high cache of high skill immigrants who would love to come in. So, why would it not be more economically beneficial to, choose that population over our low skill immigrant population?
Well, why not keep the high skill immigrants and high skill labor and the low skill immigrants and low skill labor, I guess?
Well, because I believe that the immigrants, once codified, would no longer remain in the same industry, because these industries are really only surviving based off of this kind of slave class. Like the jobs that they're currently working are like a lot of
A lot of people say that. I don't know how measurable that is.
I say it's very strong. I mean, I know a lot of farmers. I'm pretty familiar with the farming industry, and even these industries like farming, especially contracting, is probably one of the different ones. I think contracting, many of them would stay in that industry, but because that's more so just margin seeking. But
So
farmers,
I think some of the problems with like measuring that is I don't know, because by definition it's illegal. It's an undocumented immigrant. I don't know if we like necessarily know what these people are being paid. I guess what would you point me towards to like show me some sort of data that would suggest that a lot of people in the farming industry, because from what I understand about how from the like agricultural industry, is a lot of these people who are working for like farmers, they're not necessarily working slave labor. They're working because like they have they're working so well with these farmers because they have long-term relationships. They've built these communities around this specific subsect of labor. That's why they are as productive as they are.
oh, we can sort of intuit our way through it actually. So if you talk about the letters to Trump and
Well, I mean,
Trump talking about people telling him, saying, we won't be able to survive if our population is deported, right? Talking about this, this makes it obvious that, they need the illegal part of the immigration, because otherwise, if they'd be experiencing risk of collapse, that means that they are taking unfair wages. Why else would they be choosing, if they were taking fair wages, there's no jobs that, like the myth of, illegals work jobs that legals don't want to, or, immigrants, it's anyone will take a job for a fair wage. The only reason that illegals are necessary would naturally follow that it's because they're taking something that is not a fair wage in exchange for, protection, and only having some industries where they can successfully skirt around the legality.
well, do you think that maybe unemployment is just low right now? Do you think that's why?
I'm confused as to the statement. Why what?
As to why maybe farmers are complaining about losing illegal immigrants. It doesn't necessarily have to do with their pay, maybe to some degree, but do you think it more so just has to do with that, like the agricultural industry is seeing shortages in labor at the moment?
I'd say it's unlikely. I think it's more likely that,
Well, I'm pretty
agricultural
sure.
work demands, because you think with the way the economy works, people will be willing to take a job for a fair wage. Of course, having a lower unemployment will probably affect the wages that are required to be, exposed to people.
Well,
But
let me see if I can
because the problem is
actually
unique
find
to
out the
industries like
exact.
farming and hotel working.
What is the level of unemployment in the U.S. agricultural industry? So this is just the ChatGPT summary. So take it with a grain of salt, but the unemployment rate for the U.S. agricultural sector, including farming, fishing, and forestry, was approximately 7.3 to 9.3 in early 2026, often ranking among the highest by industry due to seasonality. Despite this, the sector frequently faces labor shortages, with 116,000 annual openings projected through 2034.
I mean, I guess, do you know why the industry is facing like labor shortages? Because it's not because less people. There's people who would be much willing to take like farming jobs, but it's because farmers, the income margins are so low that you don't really have a lot of money to your exposure to pay people. A lot of these jobs are disadvantageous. In the free market, people would naturally flow into a job like agriculture if it was paying a higher wage relative to the work input. Clearly, it's not, and that's why illegals have to be in this industry. why is the concentration towards farming and not towards like coffee shops or something? Clearly the illegal effect is primarily hitting industries like farming, hotels and accommodations. And clearly they're not getting paid a fair wage. I would find it very hard to believe that these illegals are getting paid, the minimum wage at least at these farming jobs. I think at most they're getting paid below what most people would be willing to take for a wage. Otherwise, the jobs would not be in such a shortage.
Okay, so the idea is that they're flocking to lower skill labor as opposed to slightly higher skill labor, like working at Starbucks is kind of the idea.
Well, I mean, more so, like what I'm saying when it comes to like lower skill versus higher skill, it's all rebuttal to the initial claim of it's economically advantageous to have illegals here relative to new legals because illegals are already familiar with industries. I would argue that the vast majority of the industries that illegals are familiar with are sort of becoming dependent on this class of people who is not working for a fair wage. So if we did actually have this codification element, we had these illegals integrated, these industries would suffer enough that these illegals probably wouldn't be working the same jobs. I think these jobs are only subsisting because they need a class of people to underpay effectively to maintain their razor thin margins. Because I don't know if you know like farming, but the margins are very, very thin. If they aren't underpaying the illegals, it would almost be ridiculous in a way, like just from a pragmatic standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that outweighs the familiarity.
I'd have to specifically look at the data. I don't know. I don't necessarily know like what we would point to like determine that these illegals are coming here and getting paid lower wages than they would be in like other certain. I agree in certain sectors that's absolutely true, but the issue is just from my limited understanding. A lot of these people are coming here and working in ways where they have like good relationships with these farmers, where they are like actually being paid some sort of ethical labor. But again, I don't know what what data we'd necessarily point to or what study we'd necessarily point to suggest that.
I mean, just from what I've seen, even if they're getting paid, like I guess, I find it very unlikely that they're making fair wages, almost factually not true. But I guess, if we're at a point of just lack of evidence here, we can, proceed.
Mm-hmm.
I see it that, we talk about the economic advantages. I guess moving into the morality, because, we've talked about it, can we deport them? I guess one of the initial sort of pushbacks on the moral justice claim of me saying that we need to deport people for the sake of the morality is, sort of two things. It was legal practicality and punishment. So, we talked about the legal practicality. I think there is a practicality, which is targeting industries that have really high concentrations of illegals. This strategy hasn't been tried. Trump has deliberately not tried it because I think he doesn't want to hurt the big business beneficiaries of this illegal immigrant slave class. And, regardless of whether or not they're getting fair wages, maybe even if they are, they're definitely not getting fair benefits. They are paying some form of taxes, be it maybe property or be it sales, and they're not getting any benefits. In many cases, they're paying into Social Security. I think it's like a very high amount of yearly pay-in, but they're not getting any output. So we're definitely seeing some level of unfair reality in which these people are living in our country. So talking about the moral ramifications of having punishment as opposed to deportation. So the big issue for me is, when we talk about having a pathway to citizenship with some kind of punishment, is that it will never outweigh the, I guess, immorality of having them here. I'm sure you can say that if you were living in a country like, say you're living in a cartel-ridden place in Mexico, your life experience is very low quality. You have a very poor existence. So you choose to hop the border over to America and start a life there. 20 years down the road, you have what I would assume would have to be a slap on the wrist. I really find it unlikely the Democrats would support jail time. I find it more likely that they would support some kind of a fine and maybe community service at the most. So if you do all this and then come over and get a slap on the wrist, it's still really unjust. Because think about the experience of the illegal who rightfully and honorably self-deported under the promise that there would be mass deportations. I mean, that guy's a sucker, right? He took what, like $3,000 and an iPhone and a flight back home? It's incredibly unjust. His moral experience is that he got conned by the left into coming, conned by the right into saying that he has to leave, and now he's in this world where he missed out on the ultimate codification. To me, that's a great cruelty, and it's a great injustice. So you need across the board, moral standards. Not only that, think about the legal immigrants. The legals in Mexico who have been waiting for 20 years, going through the legal process to live with their families, if those people know in the future that once they get that letter of no, if they would have just came over in 2020, they'd be with their families forever, I see it as a really great immorality and injustice. Many people would be negatively impacted, and it's just not fair at the core of it.
Yeah, I mean, like again, like the problem with the morality thing is a lot of it's just going to come down to like practicality for me. Um, I don't necessarily know if it, everything points to like increased immigration being economically advantageous for economies. Like any major economist
I mean,
will
but we can
agree with that.
effectively,
And then
I mean, we can
well,
almost,
again, like the problem with like I guess just the broader problem with the ethical perspective in terms of like what should be the best remedy that we go about enacting on illegal immigrants is just going to be like a practical thing for me.
well,
It's
I
going to
guess
be
for
policy
me, when we
based.
talk about like economic benefit, right, really this is all ethical. So the reason that we choose to take certain economic benefits despite, an ethical risk is because of a sort of ethical delineation. Like a really good example is slavery. Like slavery is economically beneficial, but we chose to rule it out because we saw it as immoral and unjust. I feel that the same thing should be done here. Yeah, of course there are and I would even, as I said before, the economic benefits also sort of get ruled out because there's no exclusive economic benefit to having the illegals here. In fact, all economic benefit that they have for being illegal could be easily filled up with legals, which would be a far more just, far more ethical solution, right? Because the illegals coming here actually is just, actually is ethical, assuming that, we see them fit. And I'd assume that we have more than 12 million who are fit presently because the waitlist is extensive. So we rule out all of the economic negatives of the deportation. So from there, we only really have the morality because the economic benefits can easily be fulfilled in another way. We have an efficient way to deport them through these
Well, so not
businesses. And then we just have to say, like, why not do it? If it's more moral, we can get it done, and we have other solutions to the economic problems that deportations would cause. What's the sort of linchpin stopping us from making the final push to engage in the mass deportations? Like, why not?
Well, so like the majority of immigrants who come here legally, like granted workers protections before they're before they like lose legal status, right? So like the majority, what I mean by that is the majority of illegal immigrants are considered undocumented, which means that they did come here through a legal avenue or a legal pathway.
Overstayed their visa, yeah.
Yeah, they just overstayed their visa, or they committed some sort of administrative violation.
Yeah, I guess I don't see that as any real moral statement because it's kind of like the question I always ask. It's like, do you have to swim across the river for it to be illegal? It's still the same moral claim, So it's like if we're talking about the...
Yeah, I'll get... Sorry, could you say that again?
So, if we've ruled out economic benefit for being exclusive to illegal immigrants, we've found an effective way to do it, and then we've, decided that it's essentially immoral and unjust, it's like,
Well,
why
just
not?
To be clear, like, illegal immigrants are economically disadvantageous.
Oh, hold on.
That's true. They're
Illegal immigrants are economically disadvantageous?
Yeah.
I think that they're actually economically neutral, sort of.
No, I think there was a study done by the CBO that said they're an economic drain by about $9 billion.
Then we absolutely should deport them in that case,
even
right?
Yeah. Well, no, you shouldn't deport them in that case. I'm still arguing that the most pragmatic solution should be to give them legal status so that they can get workers' protections, so that they can fill some of those lower jobs that most Americans aren't.
Well, I guess so. We have two options. We have the option of A, uphold the moral, just framework of our nation by doing the mass deportations, and then we can get all the benefits that illegals could provide just through immigrating the people back in through legal immigrants. So why would we choose to rather leave them here when they were line skippers? They're criminally hopping our border. Like, what positive statement do they provide that a legal put in their replacement would not provide? To me, it upholds our morality, upholds our justice, which is the reason why we do all of our laws. Like, the reason why we even seek economic benefit is because we see it as more moral. So, why not uphold that moral framework in the realm of deporting people who came here illegally rather than just choosing to, I guess,
Well,
codify them in
I'm
a.
not even like, yeah. Well, I guess I'm not even necessarily accepting that framing. That what I'm advocating for is like the least ethical, like the least ethical thing would probably be to just allow them to be taken advantage, economically taken advantage of by those whatever big corporations and
Yeah, it's definitely
property
less
owners and blah
ethical.
blah blah blah
Yeah,
blah.
I'd
Yeah,
argue that on
yeah.
a tier, it's like
But
that's the
like
lowest, then
what?
codification, then deportation.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess what I'm arguing with is it seems like there's a kind of like a splitting of hairs that's happening to where you're saying deportation is the most ethically optimal or maximal position that you can have, when I'm saying, well, no, you can still like give heavy penalizations. Just we're trying to weigh actual policy with like the actual practicability of policy with ethics.
I mean, I guess these are sort of two separate
Hmm.
questions, right? So it's can we and should we, like the
Hmm.
descriptor and then the prescriptor. So I'm saying descriptively, I see it
Hmm.
as we can. We know where they are. We know where they work. We know
Yeah, yeah,
we've been
like
able to
yeah, we
do mass
can.
deportations before.
Yeah,
So then we definitely can, right?
yeah,
So then we have to say, ought we?
yeah, we
Should
can.
we? And then from
The
there, it's like, we have the question of,
Mhm.
well, are they economically beneficial? They're an economic drain currently, and then they're economically neutral in a way where
Mhm.
we could easily fulfill their role in a more moral way. So economics gets marked out.
Well,
And
no, well, no,
then
they're Wait, I'm sorry. When you say economically neutral, do you mean when they're legally or illegally here?
I mean codifying them as economically neutral in the way that, yeah, it gives us a
Mhm.
benefit, but the benefit could be achieved through legal immigration, which is ethical. So it's like we have two options: one that is ethical and gives us the benefit,
Mhm.
one that is unethical and gives us the benefit. We should always choose the ethical one, right? I mean, why, what other alternative would we, why would we ever choose the
Well,
other
again,
one?
I'm not even. It goes back to framing. I'm not even necessarily saying that my standard is unethical.
Well, I
Maybe
guess let's
it's
talk
just
about
not the
ethics
most max.
then.
It's not the most maximally ethical.
Well, let's talk about ethics
Um,
then. I mean, it
at that point,
is
well, at that point, it's just like a disagreement on like policy, I guess.
not necessarily. It's like ethically is justice, I guess, important in your ethical framework. I mean, like, what is your ethical framework?
I don't.
What
Most of
makes
mine is going to be based in something like normative. I don't have like a
just
super
normative
strong like
ethics?
meta-ethical foundation. Yeah,
So I guess we're talking about normative ethics, which is obviously just preference. Clearly most people would see it
to an extent. Yeah.
preferential. Most people would see it preferential to have justice, right? Like that's kind of like a preferential consensus that our nation has
Hmm.
arrived on. So if your morality is based on preferential consensus, and our nation has a strong justice system, we generally believe in crime and punishment, and we generally believe in things being placed where they ought to be placed. Then I guess how would
Hmm.
it not be normatively more ethical to go for the more just reality? So if we can establish that
Well,
justice is
again, it can
normatively,
be more ethical, but I'm not. What I'm trying to say is my position isn't necessarily unethical.
I think it is. Well, more ethical. If you have two options and one position is more ethical, one is
Hmm.
less ethical, inherently it's unethical to choose the less ethical option.
Yeah, it's less ethical, but it's not unethical. Like
Well, but isn't it
and
unethical?
what I'm trying to balance what I'm trying to balance is some sort of ethics combined with policy. So pragmatically, again, I'll go back to I don't think it's economically advantageous to deport 20 million people. At the same time, it's not completely unethical to give them some sort of legal status.
Well, but I'm saying it's economically neutral, right? Because we talked about before,
Hmm.
you can get the same benefit from legal, so economics just kind of is out the window. I feel like that part's kind of debunked in a way. And so then we talk
Well,
about
yeah, well, hold
from
on,
at that
sorry.
point it's all ethics,
All
because
right,
it's
well, no, you can't necessarily get the same benefit from legals. Like eventually you can, but if we 20 million people like right now, and then we have to have a waiting period where there's a shortage in labor in a lot of these fields, and then there's you're bringing in new people who aren't familiar with the industries that they're already in that need new training. Yeah, like you're creating something that is impractical, and then you also have the fact that you're spending a lot more money deporting someone who is already generating revenue for your economy.
oh, well, you're spending money. Like, we spend money to abolish slavery, like
Mhm.
all kinds of things. If it's ethical, that takes precedence. So I see it like this, okay? Like, let me present you with like a dichotomy that sort of fleshes out it more. Now, this isn't exactly how I would go about it personally, but let's say I'm someone who's in favor of mass legal immigration, right? So there's two options.
Mhm.
Option A is deport the 20 million illegals, or 11 million, however many it is. I guess, do you want to just agree on 11 million? I think that's the like current Democrat position.
I don't know how it getting like measuring exactly how many illegals versus like we measure more so undocumented
Yeah.
than
Oh,
illegals,
I guess
because
just
like
yeah.
gotaways are hard to measure because
Yeah,
they're
totally.
people that got
Exactly.
away from the border, but people who are undocumented, well, we know that they overstayed a visa. We just don't necessarily have all the resources to go and deport 20 million people,
So let's run with
because
11
again,
million, right?
it's hmm,
Let's just run with 11 million for the sake of argument, you know? So I'm presenting you with two
yeah, sure.
options. Option A is we deport
Mhm.
everyone. I have a prescriptive statement for how we or descriptive statement for how we can do it. As we talked about earlier. So it's doable. So you have the option A is deport the 11 million illegals, and then I will
Mhm.
take and bring in 11 million legal immigrants. We literally just go through the wait list. If you're almost qualifying, like the top 11 million in the wait list, even say we did something like that, crazy, I would call it, but
Right,
I'd say they're more
right.
qualified than the people who came over illegally anyway. So it's still, in my opinion, morally better. Would you say that if we had option A of import the 11 million randomly and deport the 11 million illegally, and then option B, which
Mhm.
is make the 11 million who came here illegally, codify them, could we agree that the former option is far more moral, right?
Yeah, sure. If you want to get rid of any sort of pragmatic or practical advantage you may lose when you deport 11 million people, sure, like I agree with
Well,
that.
I see that the
Yeah, like
practical advantages are
if we could
very,
if we could
very low, though, right? Because the economic
Mhm.
benefits, like really, we talk about the only economic benefit that is exclusive to the illegals that are already here is industrial familiarity. But how many we have job changes? Like I
Not
think
even
on
necessarily
average,
industrial, well, not even necessarily like industrial familiarity, right? Like we have to take the time to go and deport, to like actively deport them,
I mean,
right?
compared
Like
to
I think you
national
said
budget, though,
that.
it's a
Well, I think
drop in the
you.
bucket.
Mhm.
If you're talking about
Well, so I
like
think
Obama's
you,
funding, when he was doing things more
mhm.
proper when it comes to businesses.
Yeah, like 3 billion was considered, even under like your own standard, was considered mass deportations under Obama. Uh, Deporting 11 million, like imagine how much more we have to increase the budget by that.
I mean, maybe it would there definitely be an increase, but the question is, do we have the
Hmm.
money? I believe we do. I think when it comes to allocating the money, it's a
Hmm.
very temporary allocation. When we're talking about deficit increases, it's a very big deal when it's long term. But when it comes to short term initiatives like this, I think a budget increase can be rapidly beneficial, especially for upholding justice and morality for 11 million people, while also allowing for us a lot of the social benefits that people think would be seen from deportations, which is even besides my point, because I see that morality is sufficient
Hmm.
alone, right? So if you talk about deporting these people, we have the more moral option. Can we agree that if we have the money, we have a way to get it done? It is unethical to
Hmm.
choose the less ethical option.
Yeah, sure.
So then I'd say that
But
by
but
logic, it's
but like
unethical to
you,
not deport them.
so like you acknowledge we increased the budget of ICE, I think almost tenfold last
Yes.
year, and we've deported maybe 500,000
Well, the question
people
is why,
in the
and I think
last
I
year.
know why. It's
Hmm.
because we actually know, like, where the illegals are is not as much of a secret as we
Hmm.
think, right? When we're going like the current, like almost door to door looking for intense felons, and then looking for people off the streets and positions, what we're doing is we're trying to get the outcome of some deportations while nullifying the big business impacts. This is elitism. This is only helping elites, but it's immoral and not pragmatic for deportations. I see that as a big negative of this current administration. So why is it that the budget isn't sufficient? Because we're doing this
Oh, sorry,
inefficient strategy.
you cut out for. Sorry, you
I
were
guess
cutting
why
out for
is
me
it
there.
that the
Could you say that
budget
again?
isn't sufficient?
Hmm.
Well, it's pretty simple. The budget is sufficient. It's
Hmm.
simply that we're not choosing to deport people from where they ought to be deported. People ought to be deported from places like where most illegals are working. If we went there, it wouldn't be that difficult. The illegal concentration for job employment across industries is very, very high. We could effectively maybe not get all 11 million. That would be a lofty task, but at least like a 7
Hmm.
million or around that margin, just by targeting these businesses that are heavily dependent and concentrated upon this illegal immigrant labor force.
Hmm.
So I see it as it is far more
Well, didn't
practical
we
as you
do
would
that?
see
Well,
it.
didn't we do that under? Well, didn't we do that under Obama?
We did. It was really beneficial. It worked very, very well, and it wasn't too expensive either.
Hmm. I don't know the exact expenditures that we had on it at the time, but but again, like that was around 2.53 billion over the course of 8 years, right?
Or a million, yeah. But If we're looking at the
Yeah,
population
I'm
that
sorry,
we
Billy,
have, though,
not Billy.
it was a lot slower
Yeah,
because it
we
wasn't the
deported
focus. Yeah.
we deported 3 billion people from the United States. Yeah.
Yeah. But the concentration of the
Yeah.
amount of people we had, though, under Obama
Hmm.
was so much lower, right? I mean, the illegal immigrant
Hmm.
population in America was massively, massively lower to the point that 3 million was actually a very high percentage of the illegal population. So then it would
Hmm.
follow that, now that we have a higher upscaled population of illegals in America, and now that we actually have, in some ways, better indicators under the industries they're working in, it would be massively more efficient and more simple to follow it under, the sort of Obama-esque strategy focusing for these businesses than to solve it under the Trump strategy. So I'd argue that the present budget is sufficient, just that Trump,
Well,
understandably sort of doesn't want to
it's
rock
got
the
to come down
boat.
to like evidentiary stuff. Like I think we could afford to deport more people under Obama, specifically because unemployment wasn't as low as it was right now.
How so? Do you mean like we could
Hmm.
afford to deport? Like you mean the industries were less dependent on it?
No, I mean just unemployment generally, I think is considered low at the moment, and then it was especially
Like so
low
when you say like we could deport under Obama,
pre-Biden.
do you mean like
Hmm.
we could with like less
Yeah, I
economic
mean like I think
ramifications or?
unemployment. Yeah, like I think unemployment was at like 6 to 7%. I'd have to look at the or was it? Yeah, I'd have to look again, but I'm not sure how economically advantageous it was. Obviously, I wasn't like I was pretty young when Obama was president, so I don't entirely know.
Well, I mean, the
But
cost benefit is more so that illegal immigrants
hmm
presently, it's sort of like this. Here's why it's economically advantageous, right? So, illegal immigrants, you
hmm
have three options, right? Codification is seen as immoral, so it sort of gets ruled out. And then you have the option
hmm
A or option B, which is deport them or don't deport them. In that case, they're already functioning as illegal and remaining as illegal, which, as you said before, is an economic deficit. So I've seen it marked as economically neutral, short term beneficial, long term negative. But if we say it is an economic drag, then it would naturally make sense to induce that short term expenditure for the long
hmm
term gain of not having an illegal
well,
population.
whether or not it's considered like again, this is what I mean when I said that the the my position on deportation is going to vary depending on the conditions of the economy specifically at the time. That's when I say like you probably have more room for I guess mass deportations under Obama than you do under this current administration is because unemployment was higher. Uh, uh, unemployment was yeah higher. So like we could afford to kick more people out without having a huge economic boom or a bust to our economy. But uh, under this current admin, when unemployment has been relatively low, I think it's been hovering at around like 2 to 4% since 2021. Um, it's just I don't see like in what world we're trying to kick people out while uh, while also trying to increase domestic manufacturing at the
Well,
moment.
I
That's a
mean,
huge thing too.
if you want to decrease the
Um
unemployment,
like
and
we're
you
trying to
simply
increase drop like we're trying to increase relatively unskilled labor in the United States while also kicking out a fairly big portion of our labor force.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we're fully capable of importing more unskilled laborers who it's actually ethical to import. So it's like you have two options. Option A is fulfill that unskilled labor quota with legal immigrants, which is far more ethical, as we've agreed, or option B, which is just leave the present population. And I feel like we haven't really been provided with a good
Mhm.
reason
Well,
as
I
to
didn't
why we ought
agree. I
not to
didn't
port
agree. It
them.
was far more ethical. Sorry, I didn't agree. Was that it was far more ethical? Just that it's like more maximally ethical than you could say the
See, I'd
slightly
argue
less
it's
ethical
far
version that
more
I was bringing
ethical. I'd
forward.
argue it's far more ethical because it's like the principalistic.
I
Even if we're adopting, so like
Mhm.
I'm a Christian ethicist, but even if we're adopting like normative ethicism, and we're talking about
Mhm.
relation, I'm sure that most people can agree like it's really really unethical for crime to be unpunished. Or most people can agree that it's really unethical for someone who,
Mhm.
like, if you're going to get a drink and someone skips the line, everyone immediately recognizes that to be
Mhm.
normatively bad. So if someone just gets a
Yeah,
small
but
wrist
not
slap,
well,
but
but
extensive benefit
mhm.
from this line skipping,
Mhm.
then it's greatly unethical. It greatly violates the normative reality. And even if I'm working with your normative reality, which I'd argue that most Americans aren't, being that American is a predominantly Christian nation, so it actually violates the I guess normative ethical principles of the vast majority of people because under Christianity, for example, just law is one of the most intrinsic qualities when you're talking about prescriptives for how a nation should be ran.
I guess I just merely, well, I guess merely like overstaying a visa when you already came here legally, and then building a community here for like 20 plus years and being a contributing member to society, and pretty much like a normal citizen for the remainder of your time.
I mean, but the language is charged though. It's a
I don't know who
willing.
would that. Well,
It's
I
sort
don't know
of
who would that like. I don't. I guess I don't see that as being like a deeply immoral or deeply unethical thing.
well, I do whenever you
Yeah,
recontextualize
I
it.
don't
Whenever
personally
we
buy that.
frame it under the guise of, well, someone coming over for their family, we talk about motive. We can all understand that, like motive,
Mhm.
I guess, plays, a role into it. We have to think, why is it that they're
Well,
doing it
just
and what are they
descriptively,
really
that's the
doing?
most.
What they're doing is
Yeah, well,
violating
I mean,
U.S.
just
sovereignty.
descriptively, that's the majority of. Well, sorry, just descriptively, that's the majority of immigrants that come here, right?
Yeah, I agree. But what are they really doing by this? Yeah,
Mhm.
they're, overstaying their visa, but what is that? That's willing disregard of the US Constitution, of US principles of like what makes an American. So they're violating our sovereignty. They're coming over on visas that they in many cases knew they were going to overstay. I don't think many people just happen to miss the plane back home, right? So they come over abusing our
Mhm.
visa work system and then utilize this to get long-term stay in America unjustifiably. So then, whenever you do this, of course, you have to say
Mhm.
that is clearly unethical. No one likes a line skipper. I know if you look at legal immigrant polls, actually, for
Yeah,
legal immigrants, they have
again,
very high
unethical,
approval
but
rates for, especially legal immigrants from
Mhm.
countries like Nigeria, where it's really hard to get in. If you want a legal immigrant from
Mhm.
Nigeria, it's a long wait process. Most immigrants, I believe, even have like doctorates. It's the highest educated populace in America. Nigerian immigrants,
Mhm.
there's very low approval rates for not doing deportation or for illegal immigration. It's offensive to legal immigrants and it's unjust. It's unrightful. It's
Mhm.
11 million people getting to skip the line and reap benefits that those who didn't come over will never receive. It's not even the fact that it's so unjust to come over. It's really unjust to come over, but it's really, really unjust to reward people who do come over. It sort of subverts the very nature of, should something bad be punished? Or are we just cold pragmatists who say, if it's economically maybe like and under
Mhm.
your world of like economic benefit, even if familiarity with the industry helps, like the economic benefits like
Mhm.
a 0.1% increase over legals, and I don't even think studies reflect that. I think studies reflect that because legals are generally a little bit higher skill, and it actually reflects that they actually would help more. So I see it. We have two options, and
Uh,
one is greatly
well, I mean,
less moral
I
than the
already
other.
agreed that like illegal immigration. Wait, I'm sorry. When you say that they're like 0.1%, or that people who come here legally generally more are generally a bit more skilled, do you mean that? What do you mean when you say that? I
Well, I
guess
mean, like there's
clarify that a bit.
ranges for like
Mhm.
high skill and low skill, right? So first off,
Mhm.
there's a lot of problems that we haven't even gotten into with illegal immigrants in terms of like we don't know about them. But I guess the big
Mhm.
issues where it comes to like why a low skill legal immigrant is significantly better than a low skill illegal is first off, obviously we don't know the background of them, of course. So people point to the low crime rate of illegal immigrants, right? One of the main
Mhm.
drivers behind that is criminal conviction obviously has a great opportunity to lead to deportation. So then what follows is when you remove that heavy incentive to not commit crime, and you make it to where a population of
Mhm.
people who are willing to break into our country are suddenly granted legal status, there's a lot of evidence to say, just logically, that they'd be far more likely to engage in crime than the legal low skill worker because the illegal low skill worker, in cases that we choose, almost always have no criminal record. Illegals, we have no idea about their criminal record. And even if we're talking about mass deportations, like, isn't it like something like 11 to 20%, or it's somewhere in between? I think 20% are violent criminals. That's a really large amount of
I
violent
mean,
criminals, right?
just sorry, just to be clear, like in terms of like where we get our data for the criminal records of illegal immigrants, that comes from I think mostly from Texas and a couple of other border states that are primarily red because in those data sets, like Texas is one of the only places in the United States where the immigration status uh, of its criminal of people who commit crimes that are filed, it shows like their level of immigration status. So they actually do like background checks on people who are here illegally.
I mean, even then, though, we don't have a full
Mhm.
data set at all. We don't know. Even if the people who we were deporting.
But based on the data that we do know, like illegal immigrants generally are just coming here to
So you're
illegal
saying we
immigrants are
don't know?
generally
You're
just
saying that we
coming here.
don't know the criminal record of the, or we do know the criminal record of the illegals? You're
No,
saying?
no, so the data that we do have, the like, which is the best that we can do, all we can do is extrapolate from the information that we do have. Based on that data, illegal immigrants commit far less crime than U.S. born, than native born citizens,
I guess
or
the
even
question
like
is, why are they
legal
deporting
immigrants.
so
Yeah.
much less crime though? Like, why are they committing less crime because they're a
Mhm.
better cast of people? I see it unlikely, because actually, in
Mhm.
reality, we know that they're all willing to commit at least one crime. I know it's like a very semantic thing, but
Mhm.
all illegals are criminal in that way. So then it follows that why are they committing less crime? Well, probably because they're scared of deportation. So once you take a population of
Mhm.
people where every single one of them is
Well,
willing to
actually,
commit a
no. The
crime,
mhm.
when you take a
Sorry,
population where
sorry.
every single
Uh,
one of them is willing to commit a crime, right? And then you
mhm.
codify them, what will follow? Will they remain the low crime rate population, or will they be more likely to have a high crime rate
Mhm.
than legals who are vetted? We know where they're from. We have no
Mhm.
recorded record of them ever breaking the law, versus illegals who we don't know their criminal record back home, and we know that they're willing to break at least some law. Once these two populations
Mhm.
are made
Well, if we
legal,
get
then obviously the population that's willing to hop the border is more likely to have criminal action in the future. It's just purely logical. I find it really unlikely that the illegals who have waited in line for 20 years are going to have anywhere near a similar crime rate to the people who hopped the border erroneously and are now granted, full legal citizenship status. I mean, it seems immensely unlikely, doesn't it?
no, I think the people that have built a life here for the last 5 to 10 years, um, the people that have built a life here for like the last 5 to 10 years, which I believe are the vast majority of legal immigrants who have again built communities who are trying to do everything in their power not to get deported. I think those types of people aren't committing like high rates of crime. I
Well, I
just
mean,
don't see
but,
that
but you
happening,
can't say
and
like
I don't think the
who
data
is
reflects
more
that either.
likely. Who is more likely
Hmm.
to commit crime? Someone who came over illegally and is now made legal, or someone who waited in line for 20 years and is now made legal? We know the criminal record of the people who came here legally. We don't know the criminal
Hmm.
record overseas of the people who came here illegally. So then it's an obvious dichotomy. I think that anyone sensical would be able to say that the person who came over legally is far superior in likely outcome of crime. So, if we,
Hmm.
I
Well,
guess, would you be willing to concede that likelihood?
that I'm sorry. Repeat that.
That if an illegal is made codified versus a legal who is made codified,
Hmm.
who is more likely to have a future higher crime rate? The person who came over legally or illegally? Because one person we know is willing to commit a crime and we have no clue where they're from or what they've done. One person, we know where they're from, we know what they've done, and they waited in line for
Hmm.
20 years. I think it's obvious to
Well,
anyone that they'd be more
the
likely to commit a
problem
crime.
the problem that I'm going to have with that is it's going to be like descriptive factors. Like you say that we don't necessarily know where they're from. Well, that's not necessarily true. We do know that where a lot of illegals are from. A lot of these people have came here legally initially, right? Like you acknowledge that the
Yeah, well,
majority
true.
of illegal immigrants are people that came here through legal pathways. They're not even technically considered criminal. They're considered civil offenders.
I mean, is the vetting, though, for a visa, comparable in any way to the vetting for, like, citizenship? Because they're pretty different, right?
I don't know the specifics, but I would
And even then,
assume
I
that
can
we
say that
wouldn't
many of
allow someone
them
with a
came
hardened
over
criminal record
otherwise,
into the
too.
United States with a visa, right?
But regardless, either way, many of them didn't come over that way.
Hmm.
So we're still dealing with a population. We can both
Yeah,
agree.
but the majority of them did, though, right?
But can we? I believe so. I think it's a
Just
majority. Yeah.
descriptively, yeah,
But either way,
yeah, just
descriptively, we can still say
descriptively.
that they have
Hmm.
what group has a higher percentage of population that we do not know the criminal history of. It's illegals. Like, I don't even know why we're dying on this hill. It's
Yeah, sure, it's
obvious. It's
illegal
obvious
immigrants.
logically
Yeah, yeah,
that
it's
illegals would
obviously
have a
yeah,
higher
it's
crime rate
obviously
than
illegals,
legals,
but
right?
the illegals that we do know are here commit less crime.
Currently, but once
Like
codified, do you think they would still commit less crime?
just based on the data.
You have two options: legal American, you're importing, or codified
Hmm.
illegal. Who do you think is more likely to commit crime?
I'd have to see the data on
I
that
think
at
I
that
think it's
point. Like that's
plainly
that's
obvious
just
that
like
it's
an
the illegal.
that's just like an
Plainly
evidentiary
obvious.
thing, right?
Well, I mean, it's
Well,
logical. You
like
can't
it's an
logically
evidentiary thing
discern someone with a
because
people with a
Mhm.
criminal record. Okay, here's
well,
the thing.
so if sorry one thing because if you codify that person, and they're in like the process of some sort of legal status, I think you can still deport someone who's here on legal status, right?
I beg your pardon.
You can still deport someone who's here on legal status if like they commit a crime.
You can't deport a legal immigrant now.
If you're here on like a work visa, or if you're here on like a student visa, yeah, I think you can deport that person, right?
Not if you're a legal citizen. We're arguing
they
for
commit a
pathways to
crime.
citizenship. So the argument is like, if the illegal is
Oh, I'm not.
codified,
Citizenship is a little bit different from like just general legal status.
so you think they should get an extended visa?
Citizenship, I yeah, like you could do extended visas. You could do some sort of um, what's like protection. Why am I blanking on the name? It's protection status, I think is the name, right?
So
Like
you
you
don't
could
believe in pathways to
grant some
citizenship. You
sort
just
of
believe
way.
in like a lengthened
I do
visas.
believe in pathways. I do believe in pathways to citizenship, but those ones I think do need to be extended a little bit, because citizenship is going to come with a whole plethora of different like privileges and rights and new benefits that you would have, as opposed to just being like on legal status.
Well, I guess we're getting really into the weeds, but can we at least agree
Hmm.
that the average legal immigrant is going to perform better as an American citizen than the average illegal immigrant? I mean, like, can we agree on this? Because the illegal has like a
No, I
civic
think.
has a
Well, I
civic
think.
pride, has worked towards coming in, actually is assimilating to American law. The illegal, in its first action of American illegal overstay, broke our sovereignty.
Mhm.
It's like it's clear that there's a obvious distinction in how well someone will assimilate to our culture and our legality, right? I see it as
Mhm.
plainly
Well,
clear.
I think just based on the data, illegal immigrants commit less crime than even legal ones, right?
Illegal immigrants put less crime than legal ones. I mean, yeah, currently, but I'm arguing once they're
Yeah.
codified. So obviously the crime. Or hold on,
Once
your
they're
camera just
codified,
kind of.
I
There we go. I got it now. I
oh, it
mean,
did. Oh,
I got it fixed. But like
wait.
once they're codified, I mean, obviously the crime rate will change, right?
Hmm.
E-
Yeah, that would have to be like that would be like an evidentiary
I find
thing.
it crazy
I
that you
don't need
can't
like.
answer the question though, because it's like is legal more
Mhm.
likely to
Oh
do
no!
legal
Well,
things than illegal?
hold
It's like
on,
it's so
hold
obvious that
on.
it's probably
Wait, hold
just
on,
by sheer logic,
hold on.
right?
But there's a lot of things that would there's a lot of the issue with just saying, well, like who would the incentive increase? Yeah, like on a technicality, the incentive would like increase like at face value, but there could be other determining factors that I'm just not thinking about in the moment to make those determinations, right? Like evidentiary, like it comes down to like an evidence thing. I don't know how we would measure that.
Well, I guess we can agree to disagree, but I think it's really likely that compared to legal immigrants versus illegal immigrants, once made
Mhm.
legal, the population that chose to go through the legal framework will be far more poised to make legal decisions. That's the way I believe. But I guess we can agree to disagree,
Yeah,
and
but I mean, like,
viewers can decide from there.
yeah.
But I mean, moving into like
Well, I mean, I was
that.
just to just to make my position seem a little bit less,
Gotcha. Okay.
just to make my position seem a little bit less
I don't want to
absurd
straw
than
man you. You go for
I
it.
guess the way that you're framing it a little bit.
Okay.
Um,
Gotcha.
like there could be something like I don't know a 40-year-old worker who moved here when he was 20 on like a work visa, overstayed it, but has raised a family, has built a community, yada yada yada, versus like a 20-year-old worker who comes here who is young, who's more like just just more like incentivized to do risky things based solely on the fact of his age. Like there could just be so many different determining factors that play into the average or the generality um of like an immigrant of like general immigrant data that I just couldn't be necessarily thinking about. And that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean that maybe could be true. I mean, I'd say if you had to just like put guesswork in, if you had to guess, would you say it's more likely that the legals will perform more legally than the illegals? Or
Again,
would you
even
say
at face
total
value,
toss up? There's no way to know.
like on average, like just even on its face, I don't know if I could make that determination.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I guess moving on to the back to the moral claim. I guess the
Mhm.
question is, it's like if we can't find a benefit
Mhm.
for codifying illegals, we can find a big negative to not doing anything, right? We can both agree that that's ridiculous. So we've ruled out the idea of just ignoring the problem. So we have one option. It's either move towards like visa overstay or pathways to citizenship. Regardless of visa overstay, eventually we're gonna have to have either a deportation or a giving citizenship. Because as we've seen, a lot of these people aren't really good at following the visa requirements, right? So eventually it's going to lead to a greater, required solution. But I guess the question is, what reason do we have to not just import the difference and correct this moral injustice? Why not just deport them and then, renew the benefit and fix the cost with legal immigrants? Why would that not be far more practical?
Well, I mean, again, it's like a budgetary thing, it's a staffing thing, and then it's like an economic output thing. Like it's more economic. I guess when I look at it, there's a whole bunch of prongs that just legal immigration or granting some sort of legal status is.
So you go into wait, can you break that down before we move on? Just so I can write it down. So economic output.
Yeah. So it's gonna be
cost.
It's gonna be like we already have the labor here. We already have the labor here. So just importing new people who aren't familiar with these industries, who haven't been contributing to members of society for as long. Like if we already have the labor here, why not utilize it? And then we can also grant these people workers protections so that we're getting rid of whatever like economic whatever like slight.
Well, I guess if we can pause on this point, I'd say like
disadvantage you would lose for like having an illegal immigrant, and then there's also issues with like staffing. Like we have to increase the budget for people to be here deported legally. It's not like a clear-cut thing. Like we can just pick them up and drop them off in their country of origin. There's like a whole process if you want to do this properly, right?
Well, I guess here's where I'd like to break it down, right?
Like there's a whole.
So we talked about like two things, the economic impacts, right? So of course we've talked about how legals, the only benefit that we can find economically for illegals versus legals is that they're already here. But the prompt is, like why, even under the most extreme immigration protocol, where we literally just dump the 11 million first names in the immigration request lists, why would it not be more just because of like travel time or like arraignment to get into like I guess why would it not be more advantageous to or I guess that's the initial question, breaking it down. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Breaking it down, because of course we have the issue.
We have a lot of people.
I don't know how many we have, but it's like probably not many. But it's like, is it more advantageous or less advantageous to? I pulled up the chat. It froze my stream. Hold on. OBS. I'm learning the ways of OBS now. But so
OBS, a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. But so the question is, is it more or less advantageous? Does the advantage of having them already here outweigh the moral disincentive? And I'd argue that it really doesn't, because we can just, it would be even better, like even if we literally just said 11 million people on the list, come over tomorrow, look for jobs, there'll be openings in the jobs that illegals have left. Even if we did that, I'd argue that that would be more ethical and more sensical than not deporting them. So in that way, already being here, to me, just goes out the window, because it's like we can easily just overrule that by just blindly importing 11 million people. I'd even argue that without even looking at criminal record, it would be better, because that's the same thing we're doing with illegals. The difference is that legal immigrant requestees probably are less likely to have a criminal record, just because they're requesting legally, so it'd be kind of ridiculous. So even if we just blanket through in 11 million people, I see it that it would be ridiculous, because it's still more beneficial. So then it's the question of, okay, so already being here doesn't really add anything to the issue. So then the question is budget. Can we afford to deport these people? I think we really can. We've already allocated the money to ICE.
Right.
Probably that money's not going anywhere anytime soon. So the question is the money sufficient? I think if you compare our current budget to the budget during the Obama administration, it's clear that we now have a lot more money than Obama did. I mean, I guess I could fact check that, but I'm pretty fairly certain that it's higher than 10x, right? So the question is, how would this money not be feasible?
I don't know the
I can pull it up, but either way, it's higher. I think we can definitely say it's probably higher.
Oh yeah, it's definitely like we're currently doing more deportations than under Obama, but
So the question of can we kind of agreed earlier. There's like ways we can, and the way we can is by targeting the businesses who have all these immigrants working in high concentration. So we know a way. I would argue very strongly that our budget is sufficient, because Obama's budget was sufficient to deploy that strategy with a far lower populace of immigrants, deploying a substantial percentage. So, and when we're talking about mass arrest, percentage is a valuable indicator to look at. being percentage of
Mhm.
the whole that is effectively administered to by the criminal proceeding. So I'd say that it's doable. I'd say already being here is kind of redundant because even just blindly importing people tomorrow is more beneficial. So the question is, like we narrow it down to the 3 points of like economics, costs, and logistics.
Mhm.
I think logistically it's possible. I think that
Mhm.
cost wise we already have the money in, so why not do it? And I think that economic
Mhm.
output wise, they're kind of nullified by the fact that dropping in new immigrants tomorrow
Actually, if we're
legally would be more
Mhm.
beneficial.
So when yeah, so because the cost of it is gonna depend. Like the current some like whatever nearly $200 billion that we have in additional funding going towards ICE. I don't even know if that would cover 11 million people at the moment. Um, so there's going to be questions about like how far you want to take the mass deportations over the course of the next 4 years. When you say that you want to carry out like mass deportations, do you like what's kind of the what would be like the figure that you want to shoot for in a given year? Would it be like 1 million, maybe 2 million, 3 million, as long as we're getting rid of like the 11 million altogether? Are you
That would
hoping that
definitely
it's
be
completely done in by
bottlenecked.
the end of Trump's term?
I mean, well, it really depends. I think regardless, like the ethical
Mhm.
claim is should we be moving towards it, and I think we definitely should be. So then the thing is, the yearly budget, right? I think you said what is the ICE yearly budget? I fail to
It
recall.
was like 180 to like 200 million
Gotcha. Okay, I mean,
from
so
what I remember.
currently we're working at I think it's like some estimates would say like $25,000 dollars cost per
Mhm.
deportee. So that maths out to about it being 300 to 800 billion in total for mass deportations all the way around. That's with our current really
Yeah.
ineffective system. I'd argue that there's a strong
Mhm.
evidence to show that the effectiveness would be greatly increased by going through my method of not rewarding businesses that rely on slave labor and actually going towards the companies that have this like a caste system of illegals and deporting them. I'd say if
So
presently
would you
economically the
argue for
cost of
like
the
some sort of
budget.
like heavy taxation on those corporations, or like how would you recommend going about because I like
I
I
would
don't
argue for
know what
intensive.
like
I would
I don't
argue
know like what the Mhm.
I would argue for criminal persecution. I would argue that we will say, okay, if you are harboring
Mhm.
illegals and you're paying for illegals, which is obviously super unethical, obviously super immoral, it's,
Mhm.
I mean, literally like subsisting off of slave labor for corporate gain, we say there will be great
Right.
ramifications. There will be criminal
Mhm.
charges. I think this would lead to a lot of people being, I guess, how do you say, fired from their jobs, but the people who don't, we use those as hotbeds to go in and make the deportations. Firstly, a lot of the thing is
Mhm.
there actually isn't. If these industries that we know where they are weren't hiring illegals, there actually wouldn't even be enough work for the illegals to be subsisting off of. Because as we talked about, like the unemployment rate, there's not enough options. So the thing is, you can almost like
Yeah,
it's
like
almost
we
like
so
turning the
we
water off in a house for like a cockroach, not to like dehumanize them, but like as you remove the sources of income, not only would
right,
that
well
increase
so
mass
we
deportations, but it would penalize people who are still
Mhm.
hiring them. So it would be far easier to go through and penalize people for paying these illegals, and then in
Mhm.
addition penalize people for being illegal, because they're all concentrated in one area. So I see
Mhm.
it's far more effective than people
Right.
think. I think people
So
love to kind
yeah.
of obfuscate
So
it.
like we keep saying like a lot of these big corporations are subsisting on essentially slave labor. Uh, do you have like a source that I could like not to do source me bro, but like this is kind of a little bit of a linchpin that we might be disagreeing over. Do you have like anything
Well, the
that
question
I could
is
look at?
in
Hmm.
farming, why is it that, and there are more better
Hmm.
sources for this I can pull up and I can maybe put in post, but talking about like why is this that just I think you can almost like into it too. So it's like why is it that
Hmm.
these industries have so many illegals? Well, why are these jobs not being filled by legal Americans? The answer is
Hmm.
because the wage is too low
Well,
for most Americans to take.
hmm
So illegals are taking them rather.
I get like well, I guess it's kind of a weird coincidence that we have a large amount of labor shortages in something like the agricultural industry, yet and they rely so much on immigrant labor. Is it literally just because like the wages are completely unlivable, or is it because we just don't have enough people that are working those jobs?
So looking up here, I'm seeing some sources about farm workers being underpaid. Economic Policy Institute says that. Hold on, sorry here. Actually, that's the bad source. I'm seeing Google
Okay,
AI Overview says it does. Let me
I'll,
pull up the source. But
oh no.
hold on.
I guess a good question to ask, like a browser would be, is the reason for certain sectors relying on illegal immigration for labor um, due to labor shortages, or due to poor due to poor wages?
I'm sorry. What did you say the ideal source would be? I mean, I'm seeing people saying that there
Oh no,
is mass
not the ideal
underpay in the
source.
agricultural
Uh,
sector. If we just run with Google AI Overview, which I know is probably not, it's a little better than my word, maybe. AI is telling me, AI is saying that undocumented workers very often face wages lower than documented farm workers. And also, it just logically makes sense. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to almost have evidence for the claim because it's so well, I guess, so readily claimed. But yeah, I know the cam
is
disappears when
the
you're on
reason?
tabs. But
Well,
yeah,
I
I
guess
mean,
to generalize a little bit more than just like, so just generally, I think a good question to ask, and maybe we can do like a follow up on this. Why do certain sectors that heavily rely on illegal immigration? Is it because of just generally low wages, not being able to support the average American citizen, or is it because of just general unemployment?
I mean, I would seem really unlikely that it was just general
Mhm.
unemployment, right? Because then it would have an even concentration. Like if the wages were what people would be willing to take, then they wouldn't be so high, high in farming unemployment rate as opposed to, farming, I guess, labor shortage rate as opposed to other jobs. I mean, I feel like this is just generally like an agreed on normative claim. I don't know. I would almost say like if we
Well, so from and again, I haven't done like deep study research, but from all of the like I guess economic experts that I've looked at say that there's just general shortages in labor right now. Like there's more, like the reason unemployment is so low isn't because people just aren't working jobs, it's because there's more jobs than there are people willing to work them. So like there's a surplus of jobs at the
I
moment
mean, but
basically.
what increases hiring in a company? Like what makes some companies have more people working their jobs than others?
Well, I don't
It would be more competitive
necessarily
wages,
know if
right?
it's like, yeah, but there's going to be like certain impracticalities to I don't know, say like let's say you have a bunch of farmers in Idaho, right? A bunch of like uh where there's like less concentrations of population, there's going to be like shortages of labor in some of those sectors. So bringing in additional labor is just super impractical. Like you can't force people to uproot their lives to go and work out in the farm when they could
But
get
then
a
how can
better
they get
job working,
illegals to do it? Like if it's
right?
if the
Mhm.
reason is just labor shortages, then how can they get and it's inconvenience? Like what inconvenience would apply to non-illegals but apply to illegals? Like to me, it just seems obvious that it would have to be because of
Well, so we're just
pay.
talking about, well,
There's no
right now
other
we're just
factors
talking
that
about
would
like
cause the
what
distribution to
are
be
the
so high in
reasons that they're
illegal production.
relying on. Well, I'm just what I'm saying is we're trying to get to the bottom of why they're relying on. We can even run it to immigrant versus illegal immigrant labor if you want. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of, is it because of low wages, like poor wages, like they just not afford to give proper wages to people, or is it because there's just generally uh, lack of labor to fill these vocations?
I mean, I would say we can just I guess agree to disagree, but I'd say that just by principles of economics, it would have to be the former, right? Otherwise, people would make the move.
I
People
don't know.
would move the location. Why is it that illegals are willing to make the move, but legals are not, or citizens are not?
The thing about
What incentive exists for
the thing about
illegals that wouldn't exist for legal
the
citizens?
thing about like low the thing about like low unemployment or a surplus of jobs means that there's plenty of jobs readily available to a person wherever they are. So they're not necessarily going to move out to different farms to help in the agricultural sector if it's far more convenient for them to just live in the big city and
Exactly. That's why
work doing
agricultural
that,
sectors would
right?
have to
As like
pay
a
more, you
barista
know?
or
So
a
ag sectors would
librarian,
have to pay
essentially.
more to compete with it. So the idea is, why, what other, so we can agree that farmers in the farming industry, a very large amount of workers, it's a ridiculous number, like 40 or 60, like very high, are illegal, right? So then why is it, what other incentive
Yeah, it's
other,
yeah.
other than lower pay rates that are being given to them, which are kind of given to them, I guess, like in the
Well,
back.
no, I'm not saying that it's lower pay rates. It's that you could have similar pay rates working at Starbucks than as you could like working as a farmer.
Regardless, though, it's below what a normal person would be willing to take, though, right? Can we agree that?
Uh, no. But what do you mean when you say that? Because I know
If it
plenty
was
of people
what
that work
if
at
it was a
Starbucks.
rate if it was a rate that people were willing to take for the inconvenience of working farming, then it wouldn't be like
If it was like
sixty
a
percent
higher rate,
illegal. Like
we're
like
assuming that. Yeah, if it's a higher, yeah, like if farmers start offering higher wages, of course they're going to bring more people in for labor, to an extent. But if the wages are more or less the same, then people aren't going to be incentivized to go out there to work a job that they could do far easier as like a barista and get the same pay.
I mean, yeah, I agree with that, but then why is it so many illegals are working there? Like why are the illegals
Oh,
there when it's so inconvenient?
because there's a shortage of labor.
Okay, but then why? Okay, well, I
Well,
guess
so the
what
wage.
incentive?
So
This is like I don't know why this is kind of
from what
mind
I
fucking me.
understand
It's
is
like
just it's more of a shortage of labor as opposed to lack as opposed to like low wages
so I guess illegal and
or wages
legal.
that are low or wages that are lower than like your average American would take.
So you'd say that they are taking lower wages than the average American would be willing to take for the amount of job, the amount of work.
No, so the wages across the board. So like instead of working $15 an hour to go, you can go work $15 an hour at Starbucks where you're working in like a cool ventilated
Yeah,
system.
so that's why
That's
that
supposed
makes
to be
sense to me. Why?
a lot of the
So then ag would have to pay higher. Like I get that, but then I'm saying like why does that same incentive principle not apply to illegals? Like why are illegals willing to do it for presumably the same rate? Like clearly illegals aren't getting a better rate. So it's like if the rate's not
well
good enough for people to
because
take regularly,
all
then
right,
why are illegals willing to take it?
well, it's comparative, right? It's comparative. If you're coming from a place like Mexico, at like coming and working in the U.S., even if you're working jobs that most people would consider unsavory for like the same amount of pay, they're like you're still making far more money than you would at like as being a farmer in Mexico as opposed to being a
Exactly, but
farmer in
that
the
still
United
violates like
States.
American normative ethical principles, though. Because in America, we believe that we should be making, like a
Right,
fair
right, yeah.
minimum
I don't agree
wage.
that I don't agree
Yeah.
that it's ethical to break the law, but again, it
So I
comes
get why
to
they do it.
a
I get why they're
practicality
cool
thing,
with it,
right?
but I argue
So,
that
like you can
regardless of them
Jackson
being
Heab.
cool with it, it's still unethical. So that's where we're talking about, why. It's more the reasons why I'd see it as
Yeah,
unethical.
but again, yeah, yeah, I agree. Breaking the law is unethical. Just to be clear for everyone in chat, I don't agree. I don't agree that breaking the law isn't unethical. Of course, it's unethical. Breaking the law definitionally should be considered unethical. Just it's a practical, it's a practicality thing. Um, yeah.
So I guess so talking about why we shouldn't do deportations. Because we
Mhm.
had like the reasons of economic output. We get economic gain from illegals. I see this as
Mhm.
being, I guess, stop me where it's not debunked. Stop me at the rebuttal. So I see it that
Wait,
economic output.
just be clear again, because we're getting a little bit lost in the framing on
Yeah,
this.
we're lost in the
I agree
sauce.
that I agree that deportations can be a good thing, even like inherently, just on their own, they can be a good thing, just for like deporting a hardened criminal who comes here. That's good. You don't want illegal immigrants that are already hardened criminals. That's yeah. But and when it comes to deporting someone who's already a contributing member to society, who has lived here for however many years, that blah blah blah, the whole spiel. Deporting that person is going to depend on the conditions of our broader society. That's really all it comes
I
down
guess
to.
what conditions
Just
does it depend on?
right now when unemployment has been low for like the last 3 to 4 years, when it just by all markers it would be super disadvantageous, and kind of policy-wise a little naive to think that we could just deport 11 million people and it would have no substantial ramifications to our economy. Like that's where I draw the line.
Well, what if
That's really all it comes
deportation?
down
What if
to.
my solution is coupled with importing the same amount of illegals that same day? Like if we agree that we just import
If
all
you
the
could do
illegals
it,
that are
yeah.
needed.
Yeah, if like if like hypothetically you could Thanos snap all of the illegals out and bring them to their countries of origin, and then you can import the same amount of illegals like in that same day to fill those same jobs, and they can do it in the exact same way, and like they have the same sort of relations with every single person, and like there's no like impractical barrier there, then yeah, sure.
What with the relations
Deport,
isn't? Do they
do a
need?
mass deportation.
Do they need the relations though for it to be like I guess economically advantageous? I think it would still be agreed that the
It would be
economic.
more economic just
I
if you
mean,
have like a good relationship with your
I
employer.
think like a hairpin margin though, like because people, if the job is open and it
Um,
still is giving a fair wage, it'll still be affected. I see it that the only negative impacts that mass deporting illegal immigrants could have is to people who are either a using illegal immigrants in a way that legal immigrants wouldn't be used, which is like paying them underpaid wages or not treating them properly, or b it would only not be beneficial if we couldn't import the people to replace the illegals. We know that's not true. So then
yeah.
the question is, we ought to do it, but it's like, can we? So I think we can agree that we ought to do it if we can. So then the question is all logistics. Like, can we? I say we definitely can.
Yeah,
Obama, we were able to do it.
yeah, logistics, and then
So we
it's pretty
should.
much just comes
So we
down to
definitely
logistics
should.
for me.
So we have to say that morally we should. It's better.
If
Is it
we
possible?
if we can, sure.
Okay.
And like this has been like this whole conversation has been fairly like splitting the hairs, even though we have like pretty big even though we have like pretty big disagreements on this. Some of it just comes down to like splitting the hairs on like where we would draw the line on what's like the most ethical or maximally ethical penalty to dole out versus like what are the conditions that like what are the current conditions in society that would whether like dictate whether or not it's advantageous to do mass deportations or not. It just yeah, like that's kind of a lot of what this conversation comes down to when I'm having a conversation with someone who's I would consider good faith. I would say this is a good faith debate.
Thank you. Trying my best. It's
Yeah,
hard. It's sometimes it's
yeah,
hard. But I'm trying to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like if I was having a debate with like a super hardcore MAGA Republican, like I don't know if I was debating like I don't know, I won't name any names, but if I was debating like a super
Nick
hard
Shirley.
right, like stock MAGA, yeah, yeah, Nick Shirley, yeah, if I was debating that guy on why mass deportations are good, every time that he says, well, actually, think about like the ethics of the immigrants, I'm gonna say, no, you don't care about immigrants. You want like you don't want immigrants here. You're just a racist like weirdo who posts like race baity garbage videos on like Somalis, like someone like that, I'm not going to have any sympathy towards their perspective. Just any like MAGA Republican who's going to say, "Well, think about the immigration." Like you guys don't give a fuck about immigration. Like that's not an actual real issue that you care about. Otherwise, you wouldn't have supported the guy who killed a bill that would have solved a lot of our problems with immigration back in 2024. Like just if I was having a conversation with a different person, this debate would have gone a lot differently. I guess that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a lot easier to refute the sort of the false interest in it. And for me, I can say I actually do have issues with mass legal immigration, full disclosure. But I see it that like the better solution to like arguing illegal is sort of like firstly, should we deport?
Oh, you cut out for me.
Because I'd argue that I'm massively more for illegal immigration than I am for illegal. So it's before you qualify whether or not illegal is good or bad, you have to qualify if legal is better than illegal. I guess that's kind of a complicated dynamic. But for me, it's like even just for the sake of argument, I think we can agree that under the modern framework of most people being pro mass immigration, we most definitely should deport these people if we can. So we've got the should. So like it's like can we? I think we can. And maybe this just comes to agree to disagree territory, but I think when you look at the fact that under the Obama administration we did see mass deportations with a lower budget, this is still, while it was less than we're getting now, it was still mass in relation to the population of illegals in America, to the point that I think if the same amount was applied, it would be like multi millions more than 3, which, if you're doing mass crime enforcement, that actually is percentage-wise does matter because, it's high concentration of people. You're not getting one illegal here, one illegal here. It's mostly a bunch in one industry. So I would argue that we definitely can. So I think we should, we both agree that we should. And then if we say that we can, we can both agree that we definitely can because, or I guess I would say we should be able to both agree because Obama was able to do it. My proposed solution for it is comparable to Obama's solution. And even now we're working in a more concentrated era wherein most illegals are concentrated under like 4 or so sectors. So I see it as very feasible and more ethical, obviously, that we should do it. I guess what's the holdup with the feasibility?
I guess given. Are we doing closing statements, or was this?
I guess it could be closing statement or rebuttal. I don't know. I almost feel like it's fleshed out. Yeah.
I do have to. How long have we been going for?
Like 2 hours. We're about to hit 2 hours. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably a good time for closing statements because I got to get some work done here soon. Yeah, so was that like your closing statement, or did you want to go a little bit longer?
Oh, I guess my closing statement. Gotcha. Well, I guess my closing statement would be that I see it that if you're comparing, talking purely about deporting illegal immigrants, I think the statement that we should not deport illegal immigrants is pretty ridiculously unqualified. I think it mostly falls into 2 criticisms of can we and should we. I think should we, it's obviously morally backed up by the fact that it's unethical to put someone who came here illegally over someone who came here or wants to come here legally. And then can we? I think that Obama showed that we can. I think that we have the budget currently allocated to do so similarly. And I think that we know where most of them are, being in these high concentrated industries. So I guess that would be my closing statement.
Okay, yeah, and I guess just given every economic indicator right now, I don't know why we're trying to do mass deportations on top of trying to increasing domestic manufacturing, the practicalities, the budgetary constraints, the logistics, the processes. There's just so much goes into this idea of mass deportations that just a blanket statement of we need to get rid of the whatever 11 to 20 million people that are here is just completely naive in my opinion. But each their own.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. If you want to put your socials and just plug them, you can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I'm Corbin Joesphs. You can find me on YouTube at Corbin Joesphs or on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and X by the same name. This was a fun debate. Well, gotcha. we should do a follow up sometime.
Totally, I'd be down to. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I guess that ends it here, but thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I'll post on my Instagram whenever I'm doing another stream. But see ya.
All right.
All right, that was that. It was it's an exhausting conversation. Although he was good faith though, which is good, but that was exhausting. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good day. Holy fuck. Okay. Is the stream over on YouTube? Wait, is it still going? Hold on, I think the stream is still carrying on YouTube for some reason. That's not supposed to be happening. How is it even possible? Wait. I can't even know that's possible. The stream is still going on YouTube. What?